Jake navigated the ravaged city in his pickup truck. It had been a few days since he'd completed the mission at the high-rise building where he'd had to eradicate replication pods and deal with the elite mutant called a Whipper on the rooftop. During the last few days, he continued to explore the city, fight mutants, and do missions. By this point, he'd gotten the hang of surviving in this dangerous world. He was well-versed in locating everything he needed for survival and had honed his skills in fighting mutants. He was now equipped with the rare assault rifle he had received as a reward for completing the mission at the high-rise building. Additionally, he carried an uncommon pump-action shotgun that he had stumbled upon a couple of days before, which was more powerful than the semi-auto shotgun he had previously possessed. In the drop-leg holster on his right hip, he carried an uncommon heavy-caliber pistol that he had obtained recently. Both the shotgun and the pistol matched his current level. The assault rifle was a couple of levels lower, but since this weapon was of rare rarity, it still packed quite a punch. After surviving for a few days, Jake learned that while items and monsters respawned at the beginning of every day, they didn't always appear in the same places. There were instances when a house he had previously scavenged did not replenish with new items the following day. So there was an element of randomness at play in this world. As a general rule, canned food and bottled water spawned in convenience stores, ammo in police stations, healing auto-injectors in hospitals, gas in repair garages and gas stations, and so on. He marked all these key locations on his map and would visit them whenever his supplies ran low. By now, he had established several caches in different parts of the city where he stashed his provisions. Jake also discovered several vending machines scattered throughout the city. However, he found the prices of items sold in them to be unreasonably excessive. Given that he could acquire most items such as ammo or food through scavenging, he mostly opted to purchase only magical scrolls and mana consumables from the vending machines. These items were scarce and challenging to come by, often spawning in entirely random locations unlike other more common supplies. He also purchased PDA upgrades from vending machines since there appeared to be no other means of acquiring them. He found the upgrades to be well worth the cost, as they provided valuable new features for his handheld computer. For example, he had upgraded his PDA to enable him to call in a common supply drop each day and to display all types of mutants in his current location. After purchasing another upgrade for his PDA yesterday, a new tab called Crafting had been unlocked. That was how Jake learned there was a crafting system in this game-like world. Despite this intriguing discovery, he had yet to explore how the crafting system worked in this world because he was preoccupied with other pressing tasks. He planned to delve into crafting later on, but for now, he was focused on completing missions to gain XP, earn money, and obtain valuable items and weapons. He also learned a bit more about magic. As he already knew, his mana level didn't replenish on its own. Instead, he needed to use consumables like mana marbles or shards to replenish it. He also could not acquire magic spells on his own but had to rely on reading magical scrolls, which acted as consumable items. Each scroll provided him with a spell for a one-time use. A good thing was that he had the freedom to postpone using a spell after reading a magical scroll, giving him the option to save it for a later time. Given this liberty, he opted to read any scrolls he found immediately, rather than carrying them in his rucksack or storing them in his hideouts. This approach allowed him to have a wide collection of various spells stored in his mind and ready for use whenever the need arose. So it seemed that one couldn't become a pure mage. Despite the existence of magic in this game-like world, firearms remained the main means of fighting mutants, while magic served as a supplemental tool. While magic was a valuable asset, it was not enough for him to rely solely on it to defeat mutants and navigate the dangers of this world. The very first spell that Jake had found was Push. Later on, he came across additional ones, amassing a collection of various spells. With magical scrolls and mana consumables being rare and hard to come by, he reserved spellcasting for dire circumstances when there seemed to be no alternative way out of a challenging situation without resorting to magic. In the last few days, Jake had encountered several other survivors, with many of these interactions escalating into gunfights. He had realized that trust was a luxury in this lawless dog-eat-dog world, where some would not hesitate to murder you only to take your hard-earned stuff. The act of taking another person's life no longer troubled Jake as he recognized that survival required doing whatever was necessary in this ruthless world without any rules or laws, where only the strongest prevailed. He felt pretty calm, despite this gamepocalypse, or whatever the hell it was. It might sound strange, but the end of the world seemed to have a surprisingly soothing effect on him. Before the world collapsed, his concerns had revolved around paying bills, making enough money to cover his expenses, and other mundane worries. In his past life, he'd toiled like a working animal, yet he still struggled to make both ends meet. None of that mattered now. The world seemed to be simpler now, offering a sense of peace and clarity amid the turmoil. Before the collapse, Jake had no attachments, no family, no girlfriend, and no real friends. He didn't have anything that really mattered to him. As a result, he did not miss his pre-collapse life at all. Being introverted, he never had the need to interact with other people much. He had always preferred spending his free time alone and was content with solitude. That was why he felt relaxed and at ease as he drove around the deserted city in his truck. Being alone didn't bother him in the slightest. He was well accustomed to it and even found moments of enjoyment in it. In the past few days, he had completed several missions that involved straightforward and repetitive objectives like eliminating mutants, destroying replication pods, and similar tasks. His current mission was to locate and close a magical anomaly within a mall. Having tackled similar missions before, he knew the routine and what was required to accomplish this objective. Finally, he reached his destination, pulling into a parking lot of the mall. There were a few rusty carcasses of old vehicles scattered here and there, but when he pulled up next to one of the entrances to the mall, he spotted a vehicle that seemed to be in working condition. It caused Jake to immediately tense up. The vehicle was a large white-colored SUV. He peered into the interior for a second but didn't see any people within it. The SUV was parked near the entrance to the mall, so whoever the car belonged to should be somewhere inside the shopping complex. This was unsurprising to him. Based on his recent experiences, he knew large malls often held valuable resources, attracting other survivors seeking supplies. Jake exited his pickup truck. Holding his pump-action shotgun at the ready, he approached the white SUV, peering into the interior just to make sure he hadn't overlooked anything. He confirmed that the vehicle was operational but unoccupied. Whoever had driven it here was currently in the mall, there was not a hint of doubt about that. He had to be real careful. As he neared the entrance, he spotted the lifeless body of a dead survivor lying in a pool of blood. It was a middle-aged man with red hair. Bullet wounds peppered all over his body. Whoever killed him had put lots of bullets into him. Jake took out his PDA to scan the body. Dead survivor, empty. Whoever killed him must also have looted the body, taking all the valuable items the victim had on him. Jake then accessed the recently acquired feature on his PDA to gather information about the mutants he might encounter inside the mall. The data displayed on the screen revealed plenty of walkers and leapers as well as a couple of shamblers and whippers, all the usual suspects. If the white SUV belonged to whoever killed the redhead, then he reasoned they should also be somewhere inside the mall. Pondering this, he wondered whether it was the work of a lone individual or a group of assailants. Pocketing his PDA, he tucked the buttstock of his shotgun firmly against his shoulder and stepped into the building. The mall's corridors formed a labyrinth, flanked by storefronts on both sides. Just like many abandoned buildings Jake had explored, the mall was overgrown with vegetation, with tall grass and roots emerging from the cracks in the floor and ivy vines sprawling across the walls. As he navigated the maze of aisles, his eyes constantly scanned the interior of the shopping center, looking for any threats. So far, he hadn't encountered any mutants in the mall, living ones, at least. Every now and then, he spotted dead creatures lying here and there, their bodies riddled with bullet holes. He scanned every dead body he came across with his PDA, but every one of them was empty, having already been looted by whoever had killed them. Jake perked up his ears, but could only hear the echo of his own footsteps and the sound of glass crunching under his feet. He trod carefully, wary of the presence of other survivors in the shopping center, those who had arrived in the white SUV. From his previous encounters with other survivors, Jake had learned that trust was a rare commodity in this world. He had to be real careful. Despite not encountering any living mutants in the mall yet, he knew for sure that there were more of them within the premises. The scanner app on his PDA had indicated a significant presence of mutants inside when he used it outside the mall. With both mutants and survivors lurking somewhere inside the building, he couldn't let his guard down even for a second. When Jake reached the center of the shopping center, he paused to take a look around. At the heart of the vast area was an atrium that had once served as a meeting and relaxing point. The broken fountain sat in the center of the atrium, all dried up. Green algae and dirt covered the empty basin, and the edges looked old and dirty. Around the fountain sat rusted benches. In the past, a dolphin statue used to adorn the center of the fountain, a symbol of playfulness and freedom, but now it lay on the ground, broken and forlorn. Its graceful form, now chipped and weathered, spoke of a time when the fountain was alive with the joy of visitors and the soothing sound of flowing water. Jake looked past the fountain, and on the other side of the atrium, he saw long-since broken escalators that led to the second floor. The open second floor of the mall overlooked the first one. His gaze ran along the railing, but he didn't notice anything suspicious, and no sound reached his ears. Allowing himself to relax a little bit, he returned his attention to the fountain. He noticed numerous dead bodies strewn about, not just mutants, but also several dead survivors. He couldn't pinpoint the exact number of fallen survivors and mutants strewn around. The reason for that was that all the bodies were shredded to pieces. Torn limbs and chunks of pulpy flesh lay scattered all over the atrium. Whatever the hell happened there, it was gruesome. The unsettling sight that lay before him was unlike anything Jake had witnessed during his days of survival in this harsh world. While he had grown accustomed to the grisly scenes of violence, the sheer horror of the scene before him was beyond anything he had seen before. Jake took another look around, looking more closely at the survivors' dead bodies. He didn't need to scan them to see that the pouches on their belts and tactical vests were still stuffed with spare ammo, untouched. The bodies hadn't been looted, which meant that either all the survivors who had made their way to the mall got killed in the fierce battle near the fountain, or those who survived the confrontation had fled the scene and had likely been too terrified to return to this place. Whatever had happened in the atrium must have instilled such dread in them, they decided to leave the fallen to rest undisturbed. Only it didn't make much sense. From the look of it, the dead survivors were well equipped, and as far as Jake could tell, all the dead mutants were walkers and leapers, which were the weakest types of ex-humans. Those survivors shouldn't have lost the battle to a bunch of low-level mutants. When he scanned the building with his PDA, he detected a few shamblers and whippers inside the mall, but this group of survivors should have been able to handle those threats as well. No, something else must have happened here. The gruesome fate of the torn-apart survivors suggested a level of violence and ferocity that surpassed anything Jake had encountered before. The sheer force required to inflict such damage went beyond the capabilities of even the most aggressive mutants he had encountered. Even shamblers or whippers weren't capable of that. There could be only one explanation for what had happened in the atrium. Carefully scanning the area, he took a step closer to the fountain, and that was when he finally spotted what he was looking for. He immediately froze, staring directly at the empty spot a few feet above the fountain. Only it wasn't exactly an empty spot. There was a magical anomaly hovering in the air above the basin. As his eyes fell upon the peculiar sight, a shiver ran down his spine. Having encountered various anomalies in the past few days, Jake knew those phenomena could be really dangerous. He was also acutely aware that it was hard to detect them and that the difficulty of spotting anomalies increased with their level. While some anomalies could be visually identified, others remained entirely invisible, their presence only revealed by the unsettling sounds they emitted. There were even a couple of times when he encountered magical anomalies that were not only invisible but also completely silent. In such cases, detecting these elusive anomalies relied solely on their impact on the environment around them. For instance, he had once stumbled upon an unusual sight in a building, scattered debris suspended several meters above the floor, seemingly defying gravity. Intrigued, he utilized his PDA to scan the area, unveiling the presence of a magical anomaly responsible for this inexplicable phenomenon. So he could analyze and identify an anomaly with his PDA, but only if its level matched or surpassed that of the anomaly. And sure enough, to analyze an anomaly using his PDA, he needed to be aware of its potential presence nearby, otherwise there would be no reason for him to scan his surroundings. The anomaly hovering above the fountain was extremely hard to detect with the naked eye. It appeared as a subtle distortion in the air, fleeting and barely noticeable. It materialized briefly, before fading away and staying completely invisible for a few seconds. Had it not been for the grim sight of torn bodies scattered around the fountain, remnants of killed survivors and mutants, Jake would likely have never become aware of the elusive anomaly's presence. The sequence of events became clearer to Jake as he pieced together the puzzle. The survivors likely encountered walkers and leapers near the fountain, unaware of the hidden anomaly hovering nearby. In the middle of their battle, they inadvertently triggered the anomaly, and it killed them in a very gruesome way. As Jake prepared to retrieve his PDA to analyze the anomaly, the crunch of broken glass being stepped on echoed from behind him. He swiftly spun around, his gaze locking on a figure standing near the second-floor railing. Whipping up his shotgun, he pointed the weapon at the stranger, his finger poised to tighten around the trigger. "No," the stranger said in a loud whisper, raising his empty hands in the air. "Don't shoot me, or we'll both be dead." Jake kept his weapon aimed at the stranger as he assessed him. The man was well equipped, with an assault rifle slung over one shoulder and a revolver in a hip holster. He made no attempt to reach for his weapons, though. "Who are you?" Jake demanded. The man's eyes went wide. "Keep your voice down, will you?" he said in the same hushed tone as his eyes darted to the anomaly. "I'm just another survivor, like you. I only wanted to warn you to be real quiet near that anomaly. It's noise sensitive. Loud sounds trigger it. Scan it and see for yourself." That's what I was going to do, Jake thought. He still didn't trust this stranger one bit. Once more, Jake's gaze flicked to the anomaly behind him before settling back on the stranger. "Stay where you are," he warned him calmly. "You move, you die." The stranger rolled his eyes. "If you shoot me, you'll set off the anomaly, and we'll both be goners," he stated with an air of annoying superiority, as if speaking to a child. Jake chose to ignore the condescension. He half-turned so he could have both the anomaly and the survivor in his field of vision. Taking one hand off the shotgun, he took out his PDA and pointed the camera at the spot above the fountain. Briefly shifting his focus from the stranger, Jake unlocked his device and pressed the scan button with his thumb. He then immediately returned his gaze to the stranger. The man remained in the same position, but a smug grin spread across his face, playing on his thin lips. The stranger appeared genuinely amused by Jake's distrust, which only heightened Jake's wariness. He didn't like the man one bit. He acted as if he thought Jake's distrust was unwarranted, which only added to his suspicions. He didn't buy it for a second that the stranger was oblivious to the fundamental rule of mistrusting unfamiliar people in this lawless world. The man seemed to be striving to come across as trustworthy, but to Jake, it felt forced and insincere. He shifted his gaze to the screen of his PDA to read the description of the anomaly. Name, meat grinder. Description, sensitive to noise, extremely dangerous. Draws objects within range into itself, twisting, cutting, and slicing them before expelling the remnants. Duration, 10 seconds. Cooldown, 60 seconds. Danger level, 8, high. After stowing away his PDA, Jake turned his focus back to the stranger. "Did you scan it?" the man asked. "Yeah." A smug smile reappeared on the stranger's lips. "See," he taunted. "Sensitive to loud sounds, just as I said. Wasn't lying, was I?" "So who are you?" Jake asked. From the corner of his eye, Jake noticed the anomaly shimmering as it briefly distorted the air in reaction to his voice. He was speaking softly, but the anomaly responded to his voice anyway. Uncertain about the threshold of noise that could trigger the anomaly, Jake opted to keep his voice down to avoid setting it off accidentally. The stranger seemed confused by his question. "What do you mean?" he asked in his usual loud whisper. "I'm just a survivor, same as you." He moved closer to the railing on the second floor, hands still raised. "By the way, can I lower my hands now? Or you still don't trust me?" Jake was silent for a second. Then he nodded. "Go ahead." He lowered his shotgun but kept it in his hands. He still wasn't sure what to make of the stranger. While he wanted to ask him some questions, he wasn't all that keen on talking to the stranger while standing next to the noise-sensitive anomaly. It was best to secure the anomaly as soon as possible. After all, it was the reason he'd arrived at the mall in the first place. Closing an anomaly required a special spell. He had already read the scroll containing the spell while driving to the mall, so all that remained to do was use the spell on the anomaly. Unfortunately, the process of closing a magical anomaly was a tad long and challenging. It would demand his full concentration. He knew he would have to direct all his focus on the anomaly because any distraction could disrupt the closing process, causing the spell to fail and rendering his efforts futile. With only one spell at his disposal, Jake knew that he had just one chance to close the anomaly. If he failed to do it on the first try, the spell would be wasted, requiring him to locate another scroll before he could attempt to seal the anomaly again. After activating the spell, Jake would have to devote his complete attention to the process of closing the anomaly. Having closed several anomalies in recent days, he was well versed in the procedure and knew what to expect from it. This particular anomaly was of level 8, indicating it would require approximately 60 seconds to seal shut, a considerably lengthy period. Jake found himself in a difficult situation because he couldn't risk losing focus on the stranger for a minute while using the spell. Given the anomaly's high danger level of 8, it likely had a significant range. Although the stranger appeared to be close enough to the anomaly to be affected by it if it suddenly set off, he could easily step back to safety while Jake was occupied with the spell and attack him from a safe distance. He opted not to take any chances. He resolved to either make sure the stranger was trustworthy or wait for him to go away before attempting to secure the anomaly. "What are you doing here?" he finally asked in a hushed tone, breaking the silence. "In the mall, you mean," the stranger replied nonchalantly, shrugging his shoulders. "Scavenging, of course, what else? Lot of goodies spawn in such large places." Pointing toward the lifeless bodies nearby, Jake asked, "Were you part of this group?" The stranger's gaze flickered toward the remnants of the fallen survivors. He hesitated to respond immediately, giving Jake the sense that he was contemplating how much truth to reveal in his reply. The stranger finally nodded. "Yeah," he said cautiously. "They were well, perhaps not friends yet, more like traveling companions. I met them a few days back. They offered to join them and I agreed. Safety in numbers, right?" Uncertain about the level of truth in the words spoken by the stranger, Jake asked another question: "How come they are dead, and you are not?" This time, the stranger replied right away, without taking time to ponder on his answer. "We split up. I headed to the second floor while they remained on the first. We went in different directions. Then I heard gunfire and screaming. I ran back. When I saw what was happening to them, I froze. They encountered a group of mutants and opened fire on them near the anomaly. They must have failed to spot it and accidentally triggered it. The anomaly. What it did to them. Geez, it was truly horrifying, man. It was tearing both them and the mutants apart. It wasn't a pleasant sight, I can tell you that. The worst part was there was nothing I could do to help my friends. I could just watch them die in a horrible way. When the anomaly returned to the idle state, I analyzed it with my PDA. That's how I learned it was sensitive to loud noises. Afterward, I thoroughly explored the second floor, gathering what I needed before making my way to the exit. As I approached the escalators, I spotted you from above. The thought of witnessing another fellow survivor meet such a grisly fate due to the anomaly was too much for me to bear. So I decided to alert you about it in the event you hadn't spotted it, much like my unfortunate companions. Or you may have warned me out of self-preservation, recognizing the danger of being well within the anomaly's effective range and the risk of being killed by it if I accidentally set it off, Jake thought, but he decided not to voice his doubts, keeping these skeptical thoughts to himself instead. Why did you kill the guy at the entrance? Jake immediately asked another question. Even from a distance, he saw a shift in the stranger's expression. He was silent for a second, then asked, feigning ignorance, "Come again?" "What guy?" "There was a dead survivor at the entrance to the mall," Jake said. "I assume it was your group's doing? Why did you people kill him?" "Oh, that guy," the stranger responded, shaking his head with a tinge of sorrow in his voice. "It wasn't us who killed him. He was already dead when we pulled up at the mall. Poor guy. Dunno who did it. It's a crazy world, man." He was a pretty good liar. Jake almost believed him. Almost. However, the stranger's initial reaction spoke volumes. When he confronted him about the dead guy, a glimmer of recognition in the stranger's eyes betrayed his true knowledge. That flash of recognition in his eyes and a trace of guilt momentarily flickering across his expression did not escape Jake's notice. The timing of the victim's death suggested that the incident occurred shortly before Jake arrived at the mall. With no sounds of gunfire echoing through the building, it appeared that there were no other survivors inside the mall. So the identities of the culprits were pretty much obvious. The stranger standing by the second-floor railing, along with his now-dead companions, had arrived at the mall just as the red-haired guy was stepping out, and they had killed him in cold blood for no other reason than to loot his body. Before Jake could say anything else, the stranger's gaze shifted beyond him, focusing into the distance. "Oh fuck," he muttered as he pointed his finger at a spot behind Jake's back. "We got company." The stranger's eyes widened with genuine shock as the menacing sounds of fierce growling and scraping claws reached Jake's ears from behind. Quickly glancing over his shoulder, he saw a group of ex-human walkers and leapers converging on the atrium from multiple aisles. Jake wasn't prone to panic. This trait had recently been acquired through experience rather than having existed in him from birth. In the past few days of surviving in this world, he'd learned how to control his emotions and keep his cool. However, when he found himself surrounded by dozens of ex-human mutants converging on him from several directions, he almost freaked out. His first reaction was to whip up his shotgun and train the weapon on the quickly approaching mutants. As his index finger instinctively wrapped around the trigger, Jake hesitated, realizing he couldn't risk firing his weapon and triggering the anomaly. With that option off the table, his only choice was to flee. His plan was to put some distance between himself and the anomaly before engaging the mutants in combat. Yet by the time he arrived at this realization, it was already too late to take any action. Out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a huge shambler barreling toward him. Its huge body rammed into Jake, sending him flying backward. He crashed into a bench that happened to be a few feet behind him. A moan of pain escaped his lips. The shambler had collided with him with the force of a freight train. If he somehow made it out of this predicament alive, it seemed likely that he would end up with a nasty bruise on his chest. However, aside from that, the collision with the shambler had left him unharmed, with no broken bones to speak of. His investment in increasing his constitution attribute had undoubtedly paid off, rendering his body far more resilient and durable than an average human's. Ex-human mutants continued to converge on Jake from multiple directions, creating a menacing cacophony of sounds as they closed in on him. They growled like wild animals, their jaws clacking open and shut in a rhythmic pattern, while their clawed feet scraped against the tiled floor. The anomaly above the fountain reacted to the increasing noise, its presence shimmering and distorting the air. As more mutants entered the atrium, the anomaly grew more animated, mirroring the escalating chaos unfolding around it. Jake was acutely aware that it was only a matter of time before the noise level reached a critical point, triggering the volatile magical phenomenon. From the corner of his eye, he could see the stranger still standing near the second-floor railing, watching the chaos unfold below. The stranger should have fled a long time ago, but seemingly paralyzed with fear, he was unable to run away from the impending threat. Jake knew he had to get as far away from the atrium as possible. However, as it turned out, he only had enough time to stand up. As he leaped to his feet, the shambler directed a fierce gaze at him before unleashing a deafening roar. Jake's gaze shot toward the anomaly as it erupted in a blinding flash of light. He knew what it meant. He had just enough time to turn and grab hold of the upper edge of the nearest bench, bracing himself for the impending effects of the anomaly. He felt his legs being swept out from under him as some invisible force pulled him backward. In his peripheral vision, he saw mutants fly toward the anomaly as if they were made of iron and were being attracted to a huge powerful magnet. Ditto for the dead bodies of survivors and other mutants. Anything that wasn't anchored to the floor was affected by the anomaly's pull. It felt like a decompression scene from a sci-fi movie where characters and various objects got thrown into the vacuum of space. Jake clung to the bench's edge with all his might, his body suspended in midair, relentlessly drawn toward the anomaly. The force he was being pulled with was so powerful that his grip on the bench was gradually weakening. The bench itself wouldn't yield to the anomaly's pull, though. The atrium was overgrown with vegetation, and the roots bursting through the floor tightly wrapped around the bench's legs, anchoring it securely in place. Despite the bench holding firm, Jake felt his grip slipping. He was acutely aware that he wouldn't be able to hold on much longer. As the mutants were pulled into the anomaly and met their demise with agonizing screams, Jake glanced at the stranger who was also being affected by its force. He was pinned against the railing on the second floor, likely having crouched down in time to avoid being fully ensnared by the anomaly's pull. If the stranger hadn't taken that precaution, he would have been catapulted over the railing and drawn into the anomaly's grasp. Unlike the fortunate stranger, Jake found himself in a more dangerous position with nothing to stop him from being relentlessly drawn toward the anomaly. His fingers, gripping the edge of the bench like a lifeline, were the sole barrier, preventing him from being sucked in. But his grip was slipping, and he was running out of strength. He only needed to hold on a little longer, just for a few more seconds, but each moment felt like an eternity in the face of the impending danger. As Jake cast a fearful glance over his shoulder at the ominous phenomenon behind him, he was chilled to the core by what he witnessed. Every mutant pulled into the confined space above the fountain was suspended in midair, gripped by the unseen power of the anomaly. Their limbs were twisted and bent at all the wrong angles, the bones snapping as easily as dry twigs. The flesh was being ripped from the bones as if being torn by huge claws. The sight was so terrifying, Jake quickly looked away, not willing to make out all the gruesome details of the mutants being killed. The horrifying realization that he could suffer a similar fate if pulled toward the anomaly only fueled his determination, causing his grasp on the bench to tighten. Suddenly, the pull of the anomaly disappeared, and he fell to the floor with a resounding thud. A second later, something landed next to him with a wet smack. He glanced at it and saw it was a piece of flesh. Still lying on his stomach, Jake looked over his shoulder at the anomaly. The phenomenon was disgorging what was left of the mutants, pulpy lumps of torn flesh raining down all around the atrium. As a metallic clank echoed nearby, Jake shifted his gaze to discover his shotgun lying on the floor nearby where it had just landed. Unlike the mangled remains of the mutants, the weapon had not been shredded but twisted into a contorted shape, rendering it irreparable. However, his trusty assault rifle remained slung over his shoulder. As Jake rose to his feet, the sharp report of gunfire shattered the air. The anomaly remained inert, still in a state of recharge, unresponsive to the deafening shots. For the next minute or so, it would be harmless. The bullets hailed from above, unmistakably aimed at him. In a heartbeat, Jake recognized the identity of the shooter. He turned and looked up. Sure enough, the stranger still stood at the railing on the second floor, the weapon held in his hands and pointed down at Jake. He must have decided to seize the opportunity to kill him while the anomaly was temporarily dormant. Only the bullets the stranger had just fired never reached their target. Jake had a passive spell protecting him against enemy gunfire. The mystical barrier intercepted the bullets within a few inches of him, suspending them in midair through the power of magic, effectively creating an invisible shield that enveloped him from all directions. Jake took a few steps to the side, and the invisible magical field followed his movement. However, the bullets remained suspended in their original spots. Once Jake had distanced himself sufficiently from the suspended bullets, the magical field ceased its influence on them. The bullets instantly resumed their trajectory, streaking forward and ripping into the tiled floor. The protection spell had been automatically activated when Jake had read the scroll earlier that day. With the spell now triggered, it would remain effective for approximately 1 more minute. Once the time elapsed, the invisible magical field safeguarding Jake would dissipate, leaving him vulnerable to any incoming bullets once again. The stranger readjusted his aim and unleashed another barrage of bullets toward him. Just like the previous ones, they halted inches from his face due to his protective spell. Jake stepped aside so as not to stand in their path before aiming his own assault rifle at the stranger above. In that tense moment, the realization struck the man that, unlike Jake, he lacked any form of protection. He half-turned and made to run out of sight, but before he could save himself, Jake squeezed the trigger, stitching his enemy across his torso. Crying out in pain, the stranger dropped his weapon and grabbed the railing to support himself. Losing his balance anyway, he swung over the railing and plummeted to the tiled floor below. The echoing sound of impact reverberated through the empty space, marking the abrupt end of the confrontation. The stranger seemed dead, but Jake fired another burst of bullets at the body just for good measure. He then looked around. There were no more mutants anywhere in the vicinity, otherwise, they would already have been drawn by the sounds of gunfire. With a cautious sigh, he allowed himself to relax just a little bit. Sliding the rifle over his shoulder, he turned to face the anomaly. The enigmatic entity was currently dormant, devoid of any telltale signs of being active, such as sparkling or warping the air. While it currently posed no immediate threat and displayed no observable effects, it was still there, quietly hovering above the fountain, biding its time until the cooldown period ended. Jake cast another cautious glance around the atrium to make sure he was indeed alone. Stepping closer to the invisible entity hovering above the basin, he cast the closing spell on it, eager to neutralize the deadly anomaly for good and finally complete his mission. Jake remained rooted to the spot, his gaze fixed on the anomaly above the fountain. The magic of the spell he'd just cast was slowly, but gradually, closing the anomaly. Despite the progress, he could perceive a hint of defiance emanating from the anomaly, trying to resist his attempts to seal it shut. He kept his gaze fixed solely on the entity hovering above the fountain, refusing to look away even for a moment. Every ounce of his concentration was dedicated to the deadly phenomenon before him, leaving no room for any other thoughts or distractions at that crucial moment. Jake was well aware that any distraction could result in the anomaly breaking free from the spell's grasp. So he kept focusing the magical energy on the anomaly, keeping the link intact and sensing the anomaly slowly succumbing to the power of the spell. About 60 seconds later, it finally ceased to exist. The shimmering and warping air above the fountain dissipated, leaving behind an empty space where the anomaly once was. It was gone for good, and Jake finally allowed himself to relax. His PDA beeped with a notification, prompting him to take out the device. For completing the mission to close the anomaly, he received quite a lot of credits and a good amount of experience points. Curious about his total earnings, he checked his account balance. Credits, 94,500. With just a small amount left to accumulate, Jake would soon have enough funds to purchase another upgrade for his PDA, priced at a whopping 100,000 credits. The next upgrade for the device would unlock an app called Ask Me Anything, which supposedly could answer any question related to the gameverse, the system, or anything else that had to do with this game-like world. The app was expected to be incredibly useful, so Jake couldn't wait to collect enough money for the next PDA upgrade. Now that the anomaly was gone, he didn't need to worry about how much noise he made. Jake walked around the atrium, looking for loot. Little remained of the dead survivors and mutants, just pulpy pieces of flesh. Most of the items had been destroyed or rendered useless. However, he did discover a few things that had withstood the anomaly's destructive force. Scattered about were mana marbles and shards, which Jake knew from experience to be indestructible. Nothing seemed capable of damaging them. Collecting all the mana consumables, he immediately used them, absorbing the magical energy they contained. He then stumbled upon a magic scroll. Similar to mana consumables, magic scrolls were remarkably resilient. Despite their ancient and decrepit appearance, they could not be torn or burned. The scroll he had discovered contained another spell for sealing an anomaly. So the group of survivors actually had the means to seal the anomaly. If they had detected it in time, they could potentially have survived. Jake picked up the scroll and unrolled it. He looked at the mysterious symbols and read them. In a quick burst of light, the runes vanished, and the spell contained within was now his to wield. He could seal one more future anomaly he would surely encounter at some point. It was a good thing, because closing an anomaly rewarded him with a substantial amount of XP. The handheld computers belonging to the survivors had also survived. Jake had discovered over the past few days that those rugged devices were built to operate in harsh usage environments and could withstand almost anything. So he wasn't surprised to discover that all the devices were still in working order. He collected them all, including the one that belonged to the stranger he'd killed. Sitting on a nearby bench, he stacked the devices beside him. One of the previous upgrades that he had acquired for his PDA granted him access to an app that allowed him to hack into other people's portable computers. The hacking was carried out by playing a minigame. In order to hack into someone else's PDA, he had to solve a puzzle on his own device. The puzzle was challenging, and he had a limited amount of time to solve it. And he only had one attempt. If he failed to hack into another person's PDA on the first try, the device got locked forever. Jake opened the hacking app on his PDA, and within seconds, a list of nearby portable devices popped up on the screen. He connected to each device one by one and attempted to solve the hacking puzzles. For the next 10 minutes or so, he was fully engrossed in hacking into the stolen handheld computers. Unfortunately, he was only able to unlock one out of all the devices. He brushed the rest off the bench, causing them to drop to the floor. Picking up the device he had successfully unlocked using the hacking app, he examined the screen. It appeared to have belonged to the leader of the group of survivors. Jake began by transferring all the money from the guy's account to his own. Unfortunately, the leader only had a couple of thousand credits on him. Still, it was better than nothing. He was now just shy of 100,000 credits. He then checked the map to see if the owner of the device had marked any points of interest. And indeed, he had. Jake noticed a pin labeled hideout/stash on the map, indicating a location on the opposite side of the city. This must be the group's secret hideout where they rested and stored their supplies. Jake pinned the same spot on the map on his own device and labeled it as to check. He then accessed the leader's diary. As he knew from his own experience, new entries appeared in a survivor's diary once or twice a day, describing notable events that took place on those particular days. Every entry was concise, usually consisting of just a few sentences. If nothing worth mentioning occurred, no entries were made for that day. The process was entirely automatic, one couldn't add, edit, or delete entries manually. So Jake was aware that everything written in the gang leader's diary was authentic. From the entries, he learned that the group of survivors who had recently perished due to the anomaly had been really bad guys. The owner of the device had established a gang a few days earlier, and since then, they had ambushed and killed plenty of other people. Their targets were always loners or smaller groups of survivors. So yeah, those assholes totally deserved what had happened to them. They had died a terrible death, but they had it coming. The grim fate they had met could be seen as a form of retribution for their evil deeds. Finding nothing else of interest on the leader's PDA, he dropped the device. He proceeded to search the body of the stranger he had killed. Because the anomaly was dormant at the time of the killing, all the items the stranger carried remained undamaged. Jake gathered all the supplies and ammunition from the dead guy before inspecting the assault rifle that he had been armed with. Unsurprisingly, his own rare assault rifle was much better, so he chose to leave the stranger's weapon untouched. He also found a revolver on the stranger but opted not to take it either, as he didn't want to unnecessarily burden himself with additional firearms. He was already equipped with a heavy-caliber pistol that was pretty reliable and powerful. After that, Jake finally left the mall. Exiting the building, he made his way back to his pickup truck. As he settled in behind the steering wheel, the radio suddenly crackled to life, broadcasting details of a mission to seal shut another anomaly. As he was aware, missions were usually straightforward and repetitive, so encountering another similar mission didn't surprise him. Jake retrieved his PDA and promptly accepted the new mission. The anomaly he had to close now was level 10, making it more dangerous than the one he had just dealt with. Despite the increased risk, he was confident that he could handle it. Once he completed the mission, he would have the funds needed to upgrade his PDA and unlock the Ask Me Anything app. He usually completed 1 or 2 missions in a day. So after completing the second mission, he would visit the survivor's place to search through their stash. After that, he would head back to one of his own hideouts to wrap up this eventful day. After consulting the map for the mission location, Jake shifted the truck into drive and pulled out of the mall's parking lot, unaware that his life was about to take another unexpected turn. Jake made his way through the thick woods of what used to be a city park. Now, it was so overgrown with vegetation that it looked more like a jungle. The area was crawling with ex-humans, so he stayed vigilant. He wove through the trees, leading with his assault rifle. Every now and then, mutants burst out of the foliage, but Jake stitched them with bullets long before they could get close. Fortunately, the city park was populated mostly by low-level mutants like walkers and leapers, so he didn't have much trouble dealing with them. Occasionally, he came across a replication pod hanging from a branch sturdy enough to support its weight. A replication pod created a mutant inside of it, nurturing it from a single cell to a fully grown-up creature in a matter of a few minutes. Once a mutant was fully developed, a replication pod opened to let it out. After that, a replication pod sealed itself shut once more, filling with some kind of life-giving liquid, and the process began anew. As Jake picked his way through the overgrown city park, he made sure to obliterate every replication pod he encountered, ripping them to shreds with bullets. At one point, he leveled up, but he decided to hold off on allocating the skill point for now. He planned to do that once he finished his mission and got back to the safety of one of his hideouts. With the day drawing to a close and darkness descending, he decided he would call it a day after completing his current mission. While he had initially intended to check the survivor's stash, he figured it could wait until tomorrow as there was no need to rush. Finally, the trees opened out into a vast area of tall grass. Jake paused at the edge of the tree line, scanning his surroundings. With no mutants in sight, he took in the clearing, finding nothing of interest except for a magical anomaly right at the center of the open area. It hovered motionless a few feet above the ground. Many anomalies he came across were difficult to detect, with some being entirely invisible and only noticeable by the sounds they emitted. However, the anomaly hovering in the middle of the clearing was different. It was clearly visible, resembling a large black hole as if the very fabric of reality had been ripped open in that specific spot. As soon as he stepped out of the trees, Jake sensed an unseen force tugging him toward the anomaly. Initially weak, the pull intensified with each step he took across the clearing. As he approached the anomaly, the force grew stronger. At some point, he stopped walking. It was obvious that if he ventured too close to the anomaly, the pull would become so powerful he would be unable to resist being drawn into the abyss of the black hole. Backing up until he reached the edge of the trees surrounding the clearing where the pull was weakest, Jake used his PDA to analyze the anomaly. Name: Dark Void. Description: Dark Void pulls in living creatures to subject them to mana-infused morphogenetic mutation. If the victim is an ex-human and survives the process, it becomes significantly stronger. The chances of a regular human surviving in the dark void are slim to none. Danger level, 10, very high. A failed attempt to close the dark void immediately triggers it, causing the dark void to draw in anything within its reach. Jake pocketed his PDA and looked at the dark void once more, his brow furrowed in thought. So far, he'd encountered several types of anomalies, and all of them had different abilities. Some anomalies pulled you in only to fling you away with tremendous force in a random direction. Another could shatter every bone in your body. Yet another unleashed a blast of magical energy, inflicting harm on everything within its reach. Each type of anomaly had a different and dangerous ability. Anomalies were also triggered differently. Some of them were triggered by physical contact, while others activated when approached too closely. Recently, he had discovered that certain anomalies could be set off by loud noises. The dark void, unlike the others, appeared to be constantly active, exerting a persistent pulling force on its surroundings. Jake observed a ring of barren space encircling the anomaly, devoid of the tall grass in that particular area. The ground within this circle appeared darkened, as though scorched. This ominous dark ring likely marked the event horizon of the dark void, a point of no return. The dark circle measured approximately 30 yards in diameter, indicating the area where the pull of the dark void was strongest. Anything entering the blackened earth within that circle would likely find it impossible to escape the grip of the anomaly. Jake was at a loss for what to do. Based on the description of the dark void, he understood that if for whatever reason, he was unable to seal it shut, the anomaly would trigger, dragging everything within its effective range into its depths. Although he stood at the edge of the clearing where the dark void's pull was weakest, Jake was still within the anomaly's effective range. He knew that if the dark void was triggered, its pull would intensify significantly. Jake found himself in a dilemma. He couldn't move farther away from the anomaly, but instead had to get closer to it. Based on his experience, he knew that he needed to be approximately 30 yards from an anomaly in order to cast a closing spell on it. And that was the predicament Jake found himself facing. He needed to make his way much closer to the dark void than his current position. So he needed to position himself about 15 yards from the dark circle in order to be able to cast the spell on the anomaly. Once in the correct position, he would have to concentrate fully on using the spell for at least a minute or longer. Any distraction would break the spell, triggering the anomaly. Whether he would be able to avoid being pulled into the dark void while being in such close proximity was anybody's guess. He scanned his surroundings once more, noting the absence of mutants within the clearing. However, he was aware that many of them lurked in the woods surrounding the area. Upon entering the park, Jake utilized the scanner app on his PDA to identify the types of mutants he would encounter within the area. Due to the app's current level being only 1, it was unable to display the proximity of mutants, though. As a result, Jake had no way of knowing if there were enemies nearby. Any unexpected attack while casting the spell would put him in serious jeopardy. Just as Jake contemplated the situation, he noticed a mutant emerging from the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. The leaper, moving on all fours, immediately caught sight of Jake despite the significant distance between them. The ex-human instantly burst into a run across the clearing toward him. Jake brought up his assault rifle, aligning the iron sights with the approaching threat. His index finger instinctively found its place inside the trigger guard, ready to unleash a barrage of bullets on the charging mutant. Jake paused, his finger hovering over the trigger. A moment later, he eased off the trigger, watching the mutant reach the circle of scorched earth, the event horizon of the dark void, realizing there was no need to fire at the approaching threat. Paying the anomaly no mind, the mutant persisted in running across the blackened ground, but its advance was impeded as the magical entity began pulling the helpless leaper toward itself. The ex-human was gradually dragged back across the scorched earth toward the dark void. Then the mutant was suddenly flung into the air, hurtling toward the black hole, where it vanished from sight. The anomaly swallowed the ex-human completely, without any visual effects or sounds. In an instant, the creature went from being present to being entirely gone. Jake's gaze remained fixed on the dark void as he pondered the situation. Understanding the anomaly's nature, he knew this was not the end of it. According to its description, the anomaly aimed to enhance mutants, indicating that it should release the ex-human subject if the transformation was successful. So he kept his eyes on the dark void. He didn't know how long he needed to wait or what would happen if the anomaly failed to enhance the leaper it had just consumed. As he waited, the lack of the anomaly's pull hinted that it could only focus on one subject at a time, which was a valuable piece of information. A full minute passed. Just as Jake began to entertain the idea that the anomaly might have failed to successfully enhance the leaper, it suddenly ejected the mutant. The creature re-emerged from the black hole and plummeted back to the ground. With a resounding impact, the ex-human's body collided with the earth, causing it to lay still on the blackened ground near the anomaly. After a moment, the mutant began to rise unsteadily to its feet. The creature had undergone a remarkable transformation, appearing significantly larger and stronger, now equipped with longer and more menacing claws and teeth. Its once human face had elongated into an animal-like snout, bearing little resemblance to its former self. The creature hardly resembled a human being anymore, for that matter. Jake sensed the reawakening pull of the anomaly as the dark void became active once more. However, the beefed-up leaper appeared unaffected by its presence, even though it stood next to the anomaly. It seemed that now that the anomaly had completed its transformation of the mutant, it no longer held any interest in it. The leaper twisted its head in different directions, seemingly trying to orient itself. Suddenly catching sight of Jake, it emitted a chilling scream before bolting across the clearing on all fours, hurtling toward him with alarming speed. Jake swiftly raised his assault rifle and unleashed a barrage of shots at the oncoming mutant. Much to his astonishment, the ex-human dodged to the side with feline-like agility, causing most of his bullets to miss their target. The ones that did manage to hit the creature appeared to have little to no effect, failing to inflict any significant damage. Jake wondered what level that beefed-up leaper was, but sure enough, he couldn't risk scanning it with his PDA during the intense confrontation. The mutant's rapid movements unnerved Jake, prompting him to cast the push spell in an attempt to halt its advance. The magical energy surged forth and collided with the ex-human, but it only managed to momentarily stagger the beefed-up creature, proving to be ineffective in halting its progress. Jake quickly readjusted his aim, but before he could pull the trigger, the mutant leaped forward, crashing into him with great force. With a grunt, he tumbled to the ground, bearing the weight of the ex-human on top of him. Despite the struggle, he managed to position the assault rifle horizontally in front of him just in time to fend off the mutant's incoming bite. The creature's vicious jaws clamped down on the weapon, its teeth biting deep into the metal with a screech. In a startling turn of events, the rifle shattered into several pieces as if it were made of plastic. It was at that moment that fear truly gripped Jake. Before he could react, the monster sank its teeth into his shoulder, causing excruciating pain to surge through his body. Overwhelmed by the agony, Jake let out a piercing scream. He frantically pounded the creature's head with his fists, but the mutant refused to release its grip. In a moment of clarity, Jake understood the dire situation unfolding. Intentionally or not, the mutant was pulling him toward the anomaly behind it. Half out of his mind from pain, Jake only then remembered that he still had his heavy-caliber pistol secured in its holster on his hip. Despite the haze of pain clouding his thoughts, he managed to recompose himself. He stopped beating the creature on the head and drew his handgun from its holster instead. With determination, he pressed the muzzle of the pistol against the mutant's skull. He emptied half the mag into the creature's head before the ex-human finally collapsed to the ground, dead. Its jaws went slack, and Jake finally managed to pull his bleeding shoulder free of the jaw's grip. Breath coming in ragged gasps, he slumped onto the ground, staring up at the blue sky. He wanted to rest for a moment, but he quickly realized there was no time for that because he was still being dragged backward. At first, he thought the leaper was still alive. Only that couldn't be the case, as the body of the dead creature lay motionlessly on the ground beside him. A sudden realization struck him like a lightning bolt. He was being irresistibly drawn toward the dark void, the ominous black hole at the center of the clearing. Now that he was in much closer proximity, the force of its pull intensified significantly. Jake found himself sliding uncontrollably across the ground, and the speed of his backward descent was increasing relentlessly. He managed to roll on his stomach, desperately trying to grab onto the blades of grass, but they either slipped out of his grasp, cutting his skin, or tore away. His heart raced in his chest as he attempted to dig his toes into the ground, but it proved futile. Tears welled at the corners of his eyes as he struggled against the unyielding pull, the world beginning to blur around him as he inched closer and closer to the anomaly. As the grass gave way to blackened earth, Jake understood the gravity of his situation. He had reached the event horizon of the anomaly, the point of no return, where the pull intensified even more. His body scraped across the earth, the ground rough and unforgiving beneath him. His fingers clawed desperately at the scorched earth beneath him, searching for any purchase, any bump or dent to hold onto, but to no avail. Panic surged through him as he came to the stark realization that he was being inexorably drawn nearer to the anomaly with no means of halting his advance. In a last desperate attempt, Jake reached out for a rock jutting out from the ground, his fingers grazing the rough surface as he tried to anchor himself. But the force tugged at him mercilessly, tearing him away with a strength he could not fight against. Fear clawed at his chest, threatening to overwhelm him as he realized he was completely powerless against the force that was dragging him away. Suddenly, he felt his body lifted off the ground by the invisible force of the anomaly, carrying him through the air as if he weighed nothing at all. Twisting and turning in midair, he beheld the black abyss hurtling toward him. He opened his mouth to scream, but before a sound could escape his lips, the anomaly swallowed him whole. Total darkness surrounded him. Jake couldn't see or hear anything at first. He felt himself hurtling through the vast emptiness, the sense of weightlessness overwhelming him. He tried to scream in horror, but to his surprise, no sound came out. The sensation of free fall lasted only a few seconds, and then he found himself lying on his back on the solid ground. Quickly sitting up, he gazed around in astonishment. The sky displayed various shades of purple, with a massive thundercloud swirling like a vortex directly above him. The ground beneath him was a brownish-red hue, and sparse vegetation, or what appeared to be plants, dotted the desolate landscape. It was an alien world he found himself in. What the hell? Where am I? This isn't Earth. Jake released a breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. As he attempted to inhale, a chilling realization dawned on him: the air in this alien realm was not breathable, at least not by human standards. Before he could get really scared by that fact, he felt a powerful force pluck him out of that strange world. Once more, he found himself in total darkness, the sense of free fall overwhelming his senses again. After a few moments, the darkness dissipated, revealing a new environment. Instantly, he recognized that he was submerged underwater. The intense pressure enveloping him was so immense that he marveled at his body not being instantly crushed. With visibility limited to about a dozen feet, Jake watched luminous creatures gliding through the water around him. Some bore a resemblance to jellyfish, while others looked so bizarre he couldn't even liken them to any earthly creatures he knew. At least, they are not predatory. As soon as he thought that, his sense of safety shattered as he noticed a malevolent being emerging from the shadows. The creature was so dark and stealthy that he only became aware of its presence when it was within 3 feet of him. The creature bared its jaw, displaying rows upon rows of large teeth. The monster aimed either to swallow him whole or take a massive bite out of him. Just as the creature's teeth were about to tear into him, he was once again yanked out of the water world by the unseen powerful force. After a few seconds of free falling in total darkness, he suddenly landed in what seemed to be a cave. The walls were covered in a luminescent growth, bathing the cavern in an eerie greenish glow. Transparent cocoons, resembling replication pods, dangled from the high ceiling. Inside them were weird-looking creatures in different stages of development. Jake found himself trapped in one of those cocoons. In a panic, he attempted to punch the pod enclosing him, but his efforts were futile. The pod's walls were composed of an elastic material that stretched outward when struck, only to quickly revert to their original shape. Jake thrashed his arms and legs, his movements sluggish and slow in the fluid-filled pod. Despite his efforts, he couldn't break free from the cocoon. His clothes started to dissolve as if the liquid within the pod was acidic. Suddenly, a black splotch materialized in the liquid, resembling ink spilled into the pod. However, it was no ink. Whatever it was, it seemed to be a living organism of some kind. Several more of these splotches emerged around Jake and began to drift toward him like jellyfish. They adhered to his body, causing intense pain wherever they made contact. The number of black creatures within the pod continued to grow, surrounding him from all directions until all he could see was darkness. In seconds, his entire body felt as though it were engulfed in flames. He had no idea what was happening, only aware of the excruciating pain engulfing him. At that moment, the agony he experienced was all he could think about. Suddenly, he experienced the familiar feeling of free fall, indicating that the unseen force had removed him from the unsettling cave. Within moments, his vision cleared, and he found himself hurtling toward the grassy ground. A second later, he collided with the earth with a heavy thud. He lay still for a moment, his gaze fixed on the sky, which was blue and adorned with white clouds drifting across it. The grass beneath him was of the familiar green hue. It dawned on him that he had returned to his own world. He turned his head slowly to look behind him, his gaze fixing on the dark void about 15 yards away. Lying at the edge of the black circle of scorched earth, he came to the realization that the anomaly had ejected him much like it had done with the ex-human leaper before. He had to distance himself from the dark void. Jake tried to get up only to realize he lacked the strength to stand. His knees gave way, causing him to collapse to the ground again. He resorted to crawling, primarily using his hands to propel himself forward. His fingers dug into the earth, clutching at the blades of grass as he dragged his exhausted body along. He could see that his arms were wrinkled and blackened as if charred. He had no idea what had happened to his body or whether he would survive, but as long as he was alive and could move, he was determined to get as far away from the dark void as possible. He vaguely remembered how the anomaly ignored the beefed-up leaper after disgorging it. So, perhaps, now that the dark void was done with him, it might pay him no mind from now on as well. The anomaly's pull no longer affected him, which supported his take. Still, just to be on the safe side, he wanted to put some distance between him and the dark void. He kept crawling across the clearing, too weak to stand up. The world around him had reduced to the sensation of the gritty soil beneath his palms and the harsh pull of grass slipping through his fingers. He once again wondered what happened to his skin. It was as black as ink and had a strange rough texture to it. Whatever had happened to him in that pod had left him feeling frightened. He was exhausted and couldn't think straight. A thought crossed his mind that he might be dying, so there probably was no point in straining himself trying to crawl away from the anomaly. And still, he pushed on. With grim determination, he continued to drag himself across the clearing, inching closer and closer to the tree line. His legs, weakened and unsteady, kicked behind him, seeking purchase in the ground and pushing him forward. As he dragged himself across the unforgiving terrain, he heard a mutant scream somewhere behind him. With fear tightening its grip on his heart, he glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the mutant lurking nearby. To his surprise, there were no mutants behind him. The clearing was empty and devoid of any threats. What the heck? He had heard the mutant scream so clearly, as if the screamer was nearby. How come there weren't any creatures anywhere to be seen in the clearing? Jake shook his head, dismissing the thought for now. His immediate concern was more pressing. He needed to reach the relative safety of the trees where the anomaly's pull wouldn't be able to reach him if it suddenly changed its mind about him. He continued to crawl across the ground, inching closer to his goal. With a final desperate lunge, he finally reached the threshold of his destination. Dragging his body into the thick bushes lining the edge of the clearing, he slumped onto the ground, his strength completely spent. His body trembled with exhaustion. He expected to hear his breath come in ragged gasps, but there was nothing. He couldn't hear himself breathing at all, as if he had already succumbed to death. Just as the thought crossed his mind, the world around him plunged into darkness. A moment before his consciousness completely shut down, a question arose in his mind: would he wake up? After Jake regained consciousness, he was astonished to discover that he was alive and well. His body was no longer racked with pain, and the weariness had vanished. He felt refreshed. For a few moments, he remained on the ground, gazing up at the blue sky peeking through the canopy of trees. It had been evening when he lost consciousness, and now it was midday. He had been unconscious for over 12 hours. Jake sat up and glanced around. He was still in the park, surprised that no mutants had attacked him during his prolonged slumber. He turned his head to the side, gazing through the trees to his left. In the distance, he could see the clearing and the dark void looming ahead. The black hole remained suspended above the ground at the center of the clearing. While Jake retained the memory of what had happened yesterday, a faint glimmer of hope remained that it had all been a dream. That hope shattered as soon as he brought up his arms to look at them. His arms appeared blackened, as if charred. The texture of his skin was coarse and uneven, resembling the rugged surface of tree bark, with small burrows etched into its surface, adding a unique and intricate pattern to its overall appearance. Having no clothes to conceal his form, Jake could see that his entire body bore the same obsidian black, rough-textured skin, not just his arms. What the hell happened to me? As Jake rose from the ground, he examined his body more closely. Despite maintaining a humanoid form, he was no longer entirely human. The obsidian black, rough-textured skin covering his body felt incredibly hardened to the touch, devoid of any soft spots. Despite its rigidity, His new skin was elastic and flexible, allowing him to move freely despite its toughness. He had no visible reproductive organs, and when he reached up to touch his head, he discovered he had neither a nose nor ears, and not even a mouth, making his face feel flat without all these facial features. He did have eyes, though. They were quite large, extending to the sides of his head and providing him with an extra 25 degrees of peripheral vision on each side. His only blind spot now was directly behind him. His expanded field of vision was the first thing he noticed upon waking, yet it didn't strike him as odd. It felt normal, which was why he didn't even think about it until now, as if he had always had such vision and was well accustomed to it. It was at that moment that he realized something else. Despite lacking ears or a nose, he could still hear and smell. Not only that, but his senses were far superior to what they were before. He could see, hear, and smell much better than ever before the transformation. Distant sounds seemed closer now, and he could see much farther, discerning more details in the environment. He could hear the rustle of foliage stirred by the wind and the faint movements of ex-human mutants shuffling through bushes nearby. Even though he couldn't see them yet, he already knew their approximate positions and how far they were from him, just from the sounds they made. His enhanced sense of sight enabled him to discern finer details in his surroundings, such as the texture of the bark on the trees standing at a distance from him. Additionally, he could now detect various scents that he hadn't even been aware of as a regular human being. It seemed that all his senses had been significantly enhanced. As he took a few steps across the ground, he became aware of another change in his body. He moved noticeably faster and was more agile now. He could hear the soft thump of his feet thanks to his enhanced sense of hearing, but he was certain that a regular person wouldn't be able to hear him move at all. Moving with feline-like agility, he traversed the foliage, barely disturbing it. He paused as a thought struck him. Turning to the left, he made his way to the edge of the trees. Stepping out from the bushes into the clearing, he gazed at the black hole of the anomaly hovering above the ground. He took a few more steps closer to it and stopped again. He couldn't feel its pull anymore. He remembered what happened to the ex-human leaper after it got sucked into the dark void. The anomaly had enhanced the mutant before ejecting it. Following that, the leaper was no longer influenced by the anomaly's pull. After upgrading the ex-human, the dark void wasn't interested in it anymore. It appeared the same rule applied to him. The anomaly had drawn him in, transformed him, and then ejected him. Now that it was finished with him, its pull no longer affected him. So it seemed he had been transformed into a mutant. Recalling the dark void's description, he knew that the anomaly could enhance ex-human mutants into stronger versions of themselves, with regular humans unlikely to survive the process. Despite the odds, he had managed to survive everything within the anomaly and had been turned into a monster, a change that he suspected was irreversible. He found himself pondering how he had managed to survive in the dark void. Was it his high luck attribute that had played a crucial role? Recalling his unlikely victory in the game of chance despite the odds stacked against him, he considered the possibility that perhaps his luck had played a role in his survival in both instances. On the other hand, he couldn't help but wonder if his survival within the dark void was due to a system glitch. Ultimately, he concluded that the specifics weren't all that important, at least for the time being. The key focus now was figuring out his next steps. The prospect of spending the rest of his life as a frightening mutant should have evoked fear, or at least sadness in him. Yet he found himself devoid of these emotions. Instead, he welcomed his new reality with a surprising sense of calm. Come to think of it, he was now much calmer and more confident than before. He found his thinking sharper, too. It must have something to do with him being a mutant. In addition to the enhanced agility and senses, he seemed to have gained an inhuman mind as well, which allowed him to control his emotions better and think more clearly. He looked around the clearing, noticing that the belongings he had as a survivor were nowhere to be found, and he currently had nothing on him. It was understandable. All his weapons, equipment, and rucksack had been lost during his tumultuous journey through the dark void as he was teleported from one strange location to another. His clothing had been completely dissolved into nothingness when he was trapped within the pod filled with the acidic liquid that only affected his garments, leaving his body unscathed. That was fine. He highly doubted he would need any of those things now that he was a mutant. It made him ponder what would happen next. Was he now just one of the average ex-human mutants? Was he now nothing more than the prey to be hunted down by survivors for XP? It felt unfair. Sure, it was a good thing that he had managed to survive the transformation, but becoming the prey after having been the hunter was an unfortunate turn of events. Before Jake could contemplate the matter further, he heard the rustle of foliage behind him. With astonishing swiftness, he spun around to face the source of the noise. He couldn't see the enemy yet, but his enhanced hearing picked up on a creature making its way through the foliage toward him. It didn't take long for the ex-human walker to emerge from the trees. The mutant halted at the edge of the clearing upon spotting Jake. For a moment, the mutant just stared at him, seemingly unsure of what he was and whether it should attack. A thought crossed Jake's mind that perhaps now that he was a mutant himself, the other ex-humans wouldn't harm him, mistaking him for one of their own. However, as soon as he thought that, the walker screamed in rage before charging toward him. Upon seeing the quickly approaching mutant, his first instinctive reaction was to bring up his shotgun and blast its head off. Only he didn't have any weapons on him anymore. His powerful shotgun, reliable assault rifle, and heavy-caliber pistol were gone. He had no weapons on him at all now. However, despite being unarmed, Jake's heart didn't skip a beat. He calmly watched the ex-human walker race toward him. The sight of the bloodthirsty creature charging at him didn't instill much, if any, fear in him. As the mutant sprinted toward Jake, his heightened intelligence and sharpened senses allowed him to meticulously analyze its every move. He could now detect details in the mutant's behavior and appearance he hadn't been aware of when he was just a regular survivor. He studied the ex-human's deformed frame, noting its sinewy muscles rippling beneath mottled skin. Despite its wide strides, the mutant's speed appeared moderate. Each step seemed calculated, as if the creature was conserving its energy for a precise strike. When he was a regular survivor, it had always seemed to him that mutants just barreled toward him mindlessly, without giving much thought to their own safety or strategy of taking down their prey. Now, Jake knew it wasn't entirely true. Ex-human mutants possessed a level of intelligence beyond mere mindless aggression. There was some degree of thought process occurring within their heads. While they weren't intelligent beings, they weren't entirely devoid of cognitive abilities. Jake watched the ex-human's elongated clawed hand swing menacingly at its sides before abruptly halting in front of its chest, showcasing the deadly talons that gleamed in the daylight. He noted the intricate patterns of blue veins beneath the mutant's thick skin. With a quick, analytical gaze, he determined the optimal course of action to outsmart and take down the walker. As he watched the mutant approach, he pondered another thought in his mind. As a survivor, he had relied on his PDA to gather information about new mutant types. Now, without the PDA, he wondered if he would still be able to access the mutant's stats or if this feature was lost to him forever. As soon as he thought that, a piece of info flashed through his mind. Ex-human walker, level 1. Special abilities, none. Jake froze. What had just glimpsed in his mind were the mutant's stats, the same ones that would appear on his PDA screen if he scanned the mutant with the device. So he was actually able to summon a mutant's stats with just a thought. No PDA was needed anymore. This discovery filled Jake with excitement. In fact, it thrilled him so much he didn't realize the mutant had gotten too close to him until it was almost too late. He remembered about the ex-human only when he saw it right in front of him, lashing out with a clawed hand. Jake instinctively jerked back from the attack. Since the walker was so close to him, Jake didn't expect to be able to dodge the claws in time. To his great surprise, he managed to steer clear of the mutant's talons as they raked the empty air before him. The ex-human seemed taken aback by his agility, grunting in frustration before launching another attack. Once again, Jake ducked under the mutant's claws as they swiped harmlessly over his head. Unfazed, the mutant lurched at him again, but much to its frustration, Jake once again deftly sidestepped, successfully evading the attack. For the next several minutes, the ex-human lashed out with its claws, but he danced away from every attack. To him, the mutant appeared to move in slow motion. However, he realized it wasn't the mutant moving slower than usual, rather, he had become remarkably faster than he ever was as a regular survivor. His increased movement speed altered his perception of time, giving him the sensation that he was moving at his regular pace while everything else slowed down around him. Jake also noted that the walker was affected by the pull of the dark void. Still, they weren't close enough to the anomaly for it to take full control over the mutant. Despite his speed, Jake lacked the skill to expertly dodge the mutant's attacks. While he had successfully avoided its talons by a slim margin so far, it was more a result of his newfound swiftness and quick reflexes than refined dodging technique. He clearly lacked experience in such close hand-to-hand combat. At some point, the walker managed to catch him with its talons, raking his shoulder. Jake felt no pain, though. Despite feeling the claws tear through his blackened flesh, it wasn't the typical sensation of pain he experienced. Instead, he simply received a feeling that indicated his left shoulder had been injured. One way or another, it was time to finish this fight. He clenched his fists, waited for an opening, and when the mutant lurched at him one more time, he punched the ex-human right in the middle of its face. However, the strike didn't seem to have much effect, only surprising the mutant without causing any real harm. Despite his heightened agility, Jake's strength appeared to remain unchanged. Also, being a non-fighter, he lacked combat skills and proper fighting techniques. So, he'd simply thrown the punch, hitting the mutant in the face. He hadn't even tried to put all his weight into the blow. Still, while Jake wasn't exceptionally strong and lacked fighting experience, his obsidian black skin was as hard as rock. The punch he'd just delivered turned out to be powerful enough to leave the ex-human in a daze for a moment. Before the walker could recover from the blow to its face, Jake rammed into the mutant, causing them both to tumble to the ground. Pinning his foe's clawed hands to the ground with his knees, Jake set about hitting the mutant with his tightly clenched fists. At first, he was met with hard resistance, but after landing a few more blows, he felt the creature's skull give way, and the thuds of his fists striking its head were replaced with wet, pulpy smacks. Its body went limp beneath him as the mutant finally kicked the bucket. Immediately after that, a brief piece of information flashed through his mind. Enemy killed. Plus 10 XP. Almost immediately after that, another notification popped up in his head. You have gained enough XP to level up. Your level went up from 0 to 1. You have gained 1 SP. For a moment, Jake just stared down at the mutant's dead body, its head a formless mass of pulpy flesh, his arms covered in gore almost up to the elbows. But he wasn't seeing any of that. He was deep in thought, pondering the words that had just flashed through his mind. They were not like text messages, rather, they felt like foreign thoughts that had been inserted in his head. As it turned out, he had a system of progression of his own. Despite being transformed into a mutant, he realized he could still gain experience points and level up just like a regular survivor. This revelation filled him with excitement as it meant he wouldn't merely be prey for other survivors to hunt down for XP, as he had initially feared. Instead, he would have the opportunity to level up and grow stronger as well. How do I access my stats, though? He already knew he didn't need a PDA anymore. The system notifications were now placed directly in his head. So maybe all he had to do to check his stats was to think about them? He tried, but nothing happened. It was weird. Hopefully, he didn't need another device to access his stats like regular survivors did. Jake crawled away from the dead mutant and sat down on the grassy ground, deep in thought. He tried to call up his stats using a mental command one more time, but to no avail. He was confused. Something didn't add up. At some point, he closed his eyes out of frustration. After a moment, he made one more attempt to call up his stats, and to his surprise, it worked this time. Closing his eyes did the trick. When he tried to summon his stats with his eyes shut, the data immediately appeared in his mind. Name, Jake Turner. Race, Human Morphus. Evolution Stage 1, Primordial Form. Level, 1. HP, 94%. XP, 0/100. SP, 1. MP, 1825. Body, 0. Mind, 0. Magic, 0. None. Enhanced Senses, Rank I, 16%. Common. Enhanced Agility, Rank I, 24%. Common. Enhanced Intelligence, Rank I, 11%. Common. Jake opened his eyes, and his stats vanished. He closed his eyes again and called them up with a thought. The info immediately became available to him once more. It seemed that he could access his stats only when his eyes were closed. Duly noted. With that matter resolved, Jake returned his attention to his stats, studying each line of text one by one. Name, Jake Turner. It was his name, and there was nothing more to it than just that. He shifted his attention to the next line. Race, Human Morphus. So he officially wasn't human anymore. If there were any doubts about that before, they were now replaced with a sense of clarity. He was now a mutant known as a Morphus. It got him thinking. As a survivor, he had never encountered such a mutant before. Were there others like him, or was he the only one of his kind? Jake didn't know yet, but he might find out at some point. One thing was for sure, though. Regular mutants couldn't get XP and level up. They weren't intelligent creatures either. Whatever had happened to him in the dark void was far from normal. The anomaly should have either killed him or turned him into a brainless mutant. Yet due to blind luck or some system glitch, he hadn't been stripped of his intelligence. Not only that, he had also been granted a unique system that allowed him to get XP and level up just like any ordinary survivor. With no explanation for this turn of events, he decided to set the matter aside for the time being. He shifted his gaze to the next line of text in his stats. Evolution Stage 1, Primordial Form. That was interesting. It meant he could evolve into a more dangerous form at some point. Sure enough, specific conditions had to be met before this evolution could take place. He tried focusing on the line of text, hoping to get some additional info and learn more about how the evolution process worked, but no useful tips popped up. That was fine. He figured he would discover the details firsthand when the moment to evolve arrived. Level 1. Jake had been level 15 before being drawn into the dark void. Now, as a mutant, he had to start leveling up from scratch. It didn't bother him much, though. Beats being dead, he thought as he turned his focus to the next line of text. HP, 94%. It was his health points, also known as hit points. Only then did Jake remember the wound the walker had inflicted on him. He opened his eyes, and the stats vanished. He glanced at his injured left shoulder. While he wasn't in pain, he had a sensation indicating that his flesh was damaged in that particular area of his body. Across his shoulder was a slash left by one of the ex-human's long talons. The wound was pretty deep, but it wasn't bleeding. Instead, there was some bluish light that seemed to emanate from the gash. It looked very similar to the magical energy contained in marbles, shards, and other mana consumables. The sight puzzled Jake. Did his new body not have regular blood? Was it filled with mana instead? It sure looked that way. And he seemed to lose it as it was seeping through the gash and vanishing into thin air. Then he realized something else. The wound on his shoulder was healing. Slowly but gradually, it was closing before his eyes. Jake watched the slash for about a minute more until it finally sealed, leaving no trace as if he had never been wounded at all. His body's regenerative abilities were far superior to those of a typical human being, that was for damn sure. He closed his eyes and called up his stats again, checking his hit points one more time. HP, 100%. He was back to full health, having fully recovered. The sensation of damaged flesh in his shoulder area had vanished as well. He then shifted his gaze to the next line of text. XP, 0/100. Jake remembered gaining 10 experience points and leveling up from 0 to 1 after killing the walker. After that, his experience counter must have reset to 0. To level up to the next level, he needed to kill 10 walkers. Or 4 leapers because, as he remembered, they were worth 25 XP each. Though he probably would stick to hunting down walkers for now, unwilling to take on stronger types of mutants for the time being. SP 1. It was his skill points. He had gained 1 after killing the walker and leveling up to 1. He wondered if he would be getting only 1 skill point per level all the time. Just 1 point per level seemed like too little. Maybe he would gain an extra skill point every 5th or 10th level? Well, he would have to wait and see when the time came. MP, 1755. It was mana points. As a survivor, he had needed mana to cast a magic spell. But he first needed to acquire one from a scroll. Every spell learned from a scroll could only be used once, though. He remembered being disappointed by it as a survivor. Now that he was a mutant, he wondered if he could cast magic spells whenever he pleased once he learned them. Time would tell. Then Jake realized something else. When he just called up his stats, his MP had been at 1,825. However, now it had dropped to 1,755. The exceptional memory of his inhuman mind allowed him to recall this little detail. He wondered where the 70 mana points had disappeared to. He guessed they were probably used to heal him. Or was he right when he thought his wounds bled mana like regular people lost blood? He wasn't sure yet. Maybe it was both. Jake moved on to the next 3 lines of text. Body, 0. Mind, 0. Magic, 0. Those should be his attributes. It was time for him to figure out how his progression system worked and choose which attribute to allocate his skill point to. Jake tried to get more info on the 3 attributes, but nothing happened. Well, at least, they seemed to be self-explanatory. Body should make him stronger, allowing him to deal more damage while making his own body more resistant to damage. Mind probably made him smarter and sharpened his senses. As for magic, it apparently was related to, well, magic. Though he still didn't know how the magic system worked for him now that he was a mutant. So he had 1 skill point to invest in one of these attributes. He was choosing between body and mind. Upgrading magic at this point seemed impractical, considering he wasn't even aware of how to use magic yet. Maybe magic had nothing to do with casting magic spells at all. Perhaps this attribute simply allowed him to store more mana inside his strange body. For all he knew, the magical energy stored within him might simply be used to heal him, without anything more to it than that. Anyway, he was considering putting the SP into body. It felt like the best use for his very first skill point. However, he decided to check out the rest of his stats before allocating the skill point. He shifted his gaze to the line of text below his 3 attributes. None. Jake stared at it for a moment. What was that? He didn't know. Deciding to leave it alone for now, he shifted his attention to the last 3 lines of text in his stats. Enhanced Senses, Rank I, 16%. Common. Enhanced Agility, Rank I, 24%. Common. Enhanced Intelligence, Rank I, 11%. Common. So he actually had enhanced senses, agility, and intelligence. It explained why he could move more easily and swiftly, think sharper, and notice more details in his surroundings than he had as a human. As he gazed at the 3 lines, he realized he could summon additional information on each of them with just a thought. Skill, Enhanced Senses. Description: the mutant gains heightened senses, improving their perception, granting better awareness of their surroundings, and sharpening the ability to detect subtle changes in their environment. Upgrades: 0 of 3, common. Requirements: none. Cost: already owned. He couldn't help but notice a couple of interesting details about the skill. First, it could be upgraded. Second, it was labeled as common, which likely meant it could potentially be upgraded to the next rarity level at some point. He decided to give more attention to these 2 details at a later time, though. He moved on to check out the next skill. Skill, Enhanced Agility. Description: the mutants in human agility enables for much faster and quieter movement. When moving, the mutant hardly produces any noise at all. Upgrades: 0 of 3, common. Requirements: none. Cost: already owned. Thanks to this skill, all his movements were much swifter and more agile than before. Enhanced agility also helped him move much more quietly. He remembered moving through the foliage, hardly disturbing the branches of the bushes he passed through. However, while this skill made him faster and more agile, it didn't really improve his ability to dodge melee attacks, as Jake had discovered during his recent encounter with the Walker. Perhaps there was another skill designed specifically for that purpose? At last, he read the description and the stats of the 3rd skill. Skill, Enhanced Intelligence. Description: the mutant's enhanced intelligence helps them solve problems quickly, learn fast, and think clearly. They can understand things deeply, come up with smart plans, and adapt easily to new situations. With their sharp mind, they can outsmart their enemies, predict outcomes, and find clever ways to overcome challenges. Their exceptional brain power is a big advantage in handling tough situations and succeeding in different tasks. Upgrades: 0 of 3, common. Requirements: none. Cost: already owned. So each of the 3 skills was currently at rank I. Each of them had a progression bar. Currently, Enhanced Senses was at 16%, Enhanced Agility at 24%, and Enhanced Intelligence at 11%. Did his Enhanced Senses, Enhanced Agility, and Enhanced Intelligence increase every time he utilized these skills? Or did he need to exert more effort, think harder, move faster, and remain more attentive, for them to go up? Unsure, he decided to pay closer attention to determine the answer from now on. When the progress of a skill reached 100%, he would most likely be able to level it up to the next rank, making the skill more powerful. Jake then returned his attention to the line of text he still hadn't figured out. None. He stared at it for a second. Then he focused on it with more attention, and suddenly a new piece of info materialized in his mind. Genetic Development Interface. Evolution Stage 1, Primordial Form. Abilities, 0 of 3. Skills, 3 of 7. Ability, Claws. Requirements, Body 1. Cost, 1000 MP. Ability, Smash Fists. Requirements, Body 2. Cost, 2000 MP. Ability, Swords. Requirements, Body 3. Cost, 3000 MP. Skill, Enhanced Strength. Requirements, Body 5. Cost, 3000 MP. Skill, Enhanced Reflexes. Requirements, Body 5, Mind 3. Cost, 3000 MP. Skill, Feral Instincts. Requirements, Mind 5, Magic 3. Cost, 4000 MP. Skill, Enhanced Regeneration. Requirements, Body 7, Magic 5, Mind 3. Cost, 5000 MP. Skill, Enhanced Senses. Requirements, none. Cost, already owned. Skill, Enhanced Agility. Requirements, none. Cost, already owned. Skill, Enhanced Intelligence. Requirements, none. Cost, already owned. Wow, Jake thought. So from the genetic development interface, he could acquire new abilities and skills. He already possessed 3 skills, which had been granted to him after he underwent the mutation. After checking the menu one more time, he became aware of 2 key points. First, to obtain a new skill or ability, he needed to spend a certain amount of MP, which meant that mana points also served as currency. Second, each ability and skill had specific requirements. Currently, out of all the skills and abilities listed, he could obtain only one. If he put his skill point into Body, he would be able to purchase the ability called Claws. He focused on the ability to gather more info about it. Ability, Claws. Description: the mutant can transform their hands into razor-sharp claws, allowing for swift and deadly attacks and capable of cutting through almost anything. Upgrades, 0 of 3, Common. Requirements, Body 1. Cost, 1000 MP. This was basically a weapon. It was just what he had been hoping for. He needed something more powerful than his bare fists to use in battles against mutants. He checked how many mana points he had. He recalled having over 1,000, but he wanted to double-check. MP, 1,740. It was strange. He remembered having 1,755 mana points after the slash on his shoulder healed. Now he had 1,740. Where had the 15 mana points gone? Perhaps his new body functioned on mana, gradually consuming it. Sure looked that way. However, Jake decided to delve into that matter in more detail at a later time. What was more important right now was that he had more than enough mana points to acquire Claws, and after obtaining it, he would have some left. He shifted his attention to his attributes. With a thought, he allocated his skill point into Body. He then summoned the genetic development interface once more. Below the Claws ability, there was now a new line of text. Acquire, Y/N. Jake chose yes. He noticed that the Claws ability moved down to the bottom of the genetic development interface, where the skills and abilities he already possessed were. He now had only 740 mana points left. Other than that, nothing else changed after he acquired Claws. Jake looked over his stats one more time to make sure he hadn't missed anything. Name, Jake Turner. Race, Human Morphus. Evolution Stage 1, Primordial Form. Level, 1. HP, 100%. XP, 0 out of 100. SP, 0. MP, 740. Body, 1. Mind, 0. Magic, 0. Claws, Rank I, 0%. Common. Enhanced Senses, Rank I, 16%. Common. Enhanced Agility, Rank I, 24%. Common. Enhanced Intelligence, Rank I, 11%. Common. After that, Jake opened his eyes, and all the stats disappeared. He stood up from the ground. He was still in the clearing surrounded by trees. Behind him was the dark void. Nothing had changed in his surroundings while he'd been preoccupied with his stats. His heightened sense of hearing picked up the sounds of mutants somewhere in the trees, but they were too far away for him to be concerned about. He glanced at his body. There weren't any visible changes to it. He wasn't bulkier or more muscular. Still, having allocated a skill point into body had to stand for something. Perhaps his body was now more resistant to damage. At least, he hoped so. He then raised his hands and gave them a look over. Despite him having acquired claws, they appeared unchanged, showing no difference at all. Aside from being obsidian black and textured, they pretty much looked like regular human hands. Maybe he could transform them into claws with a thought? He decided to give it a try, and it worked. His fingers and thumbs on both hands widened and elongated into something resembling long, curved talons. The transformation wasn't instantaneous, it took his hands a few seconds to assume their final shape. Jake brought them closer to his face for a better look. Each of his fingers was a couple of inches longer now, curving slightly and tapering off to a point. They looked quite menacing. He surely wouldn't want a creature to rake his body with such claws. He heard a mutant cry somewhere off to his right. He turned his head in that direction. While his enhanced hearing allowed him to detect the creature, he couldn't see it yet. The mutant remained hidden from sight within the dense foliage, but based on the sounds it emitted, it wasn't far away. Jake decided it was time to test his newly acquired claws on some ex-humans. He darted into the trees, moving effortlessly and producing minimal noise. It took him just a few seconds to reach the creature. It was a walker. The mutant had its back turned to him and only became aware of his presence when Jake got within a couple of feet of it. The walker wheeled around, growling and lashing out with a clawed hand upon spotting Jake. However, to Jake, the mutant seemed to move in slow motion. He easily evaded the attack by ducking his head. Before the mutant could regain its balance, Jake swiftly aimed the claws on his right hand toward its throat. His talons tore into the flesh with ease, and dark blood poured from the wound. The walker took an unsteady step toward Jake before collapsing to the ground. Enemy killed. Plus 10 XP. Just like that, the mutant had been dealt with. It had taken Jake less than a second to deliver the mortal blow to the ex-human. The killing excited him. His claws turned out to be even more dangerous than he had thought. Armed with such powerful talons, dispatching ex-humans wouldn't be much of a problem from now on. Jake heard another walker moving through the foliage nearby. He turned in that direction and sprinted after his prey. The walker spotted him before he could get within striking distance. It didn't help the mutant much, though. The ex-human moved toward him, swinging its clawed hands at him. He ducked under its arms, slashing his own claws across the mutant's stomach. The tips of his talons ripped through the walker's ragged clothes, digging deep into its flesh. The mutant's steaming intestines spilled out onto the ground. Enemy killed. Plus 10 XP. There were a few more walkers nearby. They heard the commotion and rushed at Jake from several directions. He ducked his head as the first one approached to attack. Jake swept his claws diagonally across the mutant's face, leaving long bleeding scratches in its flesh. A second slash opened its throat almost to the spine, nearly severing its head. Before the dead walker collapsed, Jake had already turned his attention to the next ex-human. He dodged its clawed hands and counterattacked, killing the mutant in less than a second. One of the other creatures managed to catch his shoulder with a clawed hand, but he barely noticed it. When he glanced at his shoulder, he was surprised to find it barely scratched with no bluish energy seeping out like it had happened the last time he was wounded. The skill point he had put into body had indeed made his body more robust and resistant to damage. The walkers attacked him from several directions, but he killed all of them without much trouble. When the last one was taken care of, a notification popped up in his head. You have gained enough XP to level up. Your level went up from 1 to 2. You have gained 1 SP. Jake closed his eyes to summon his stats. He invested the skill point into body, increasing it to 2. He then resumed his hunt, tracking down and slaying walkers that lurked in the woods that had once been a city park. After taking out 25 more walkers, he leveled up to 3. This time, he invested the skill point into mind. He then checked his stats once more. Name, Jake Turner. Race, ex-Human Morphus. Evolution Stage 1, Primordial Form. Level, 3. HP, 100%. XP, 0 out of 500. SP, 0. MP, 580. Body, 2. Mind, 1. Magic, 0. Claws, rank I, 17%. Common. Enhanced senses, rank I, 22%. Common. Enhanced agility, rank I, 42%. Common. Enhanced intelligence, rank I, 19%. Common. Claws, enhanced senses, enhanced agility, and enhanced intelligence had all improved, with enhanced agility showing significant growth. His skills and abilities indeed increased when they were in active use. He also noticed that to level up to 4, he needed to gain 500 XP. This meant he had to kill 50 walkers to level up. Perhaps it was a better idea to leave the park and track down some leapers in high-rise buildings instead, as each leaper was worth 25 XP. He might also encounter some shamblers, each worth 50 XP. As a survivor, he had always been wary of shamblers, as they were formidable foes. Now he should be able to deal with them without much trouble. He could take on multiple ex-humans at the same time and deal with all of them within seconds without breaking a sweat. Given how easily he could slay mutants now, Jake was certain he would level up much faster than he did as a regular survivor. Well, at least, there was a silver lining to being a mutant. Jake wanted to smile at the thought, but he had no mouth to do so. Jake ran through the devastated city. As a survivor, he'd hardly ever run when simply exploring the city. Now that he was a mutant, moving at a constant brisk jog felt more natural than simply walking. He moved with ease, running swiftly and easily, without getting tired at all. He leaped over cracks in the road and vaulted over rusty car frames, feeling the cool air brushing against his skin. To his amazement, he found himself relishing being a mutant far more than he had thought he would. Every now and then, he encountered some stragglers, only ex-human walkers so far. He dealt with them without even bothering to slow down, simply dashing past them and slashing their throats with his claws. He felt like he was now the most dangerous predator in this new world. However, that wasn't entirely true. At least, not yet. A walker was the weakest type of mutant. Jake was well aware it would be premature to become overconfident. While he handled walkers with ease, he knew he would need to exercise more caution when confronted with more dangerous types of mutants. At some point, he realized something. His hands couldn't remain transformed into claws constantly. After a while, they reverted to their normal human-like hands. This had occurred a few times by now, but thankfully never during a fight. He noticed that his claws changed back into hands after a period of inactivity from combat. With a thought, he could morph them into claws again, but as he later discovered, the transformation process depleted some of his mana. Then, another thing crossed his mind. He was beginning to feel tired. Fatigue was creeping in, wearing down his body. He couldn't move as swiftly as before or be as agile as he once was. When facing off against walkers, dodging their attacks became more challenging. His movements had slowed down, and he struggled to fight at his best. Soon after, he also felt a hunger-like sensation stirring within him. It puzzled him. For a moment, he couldn't figure out how he could ease his hunger without even having a mouth. Then it hit him. He understood what it all meant. He checked his stats and saw he had less than 250 MP left. Unlike humans, he didn't need food or water. He was a magical creature, and the only thing he needed for survival was mana, the magical energy stored in marbles, shards, and other mana consumables. His body was constantly consuming the mana contained in his body. The more active he was, the quicker his body devoured the magical energy within it. Certain actions, such as morphing his hands into claws, also depleted some mana. Currently, the small amount of mana remaining in his body was solely used to keep his body functioning. However, he could no longer fight at full strength or move as quickly and be as agile as before. Jake couldn't help but wonder what would happen when he ran out of the 200 MP that still remained in his body. He had a grim feeling that he would simply die. Being a magical creature, he couldn't survive without mana. After coming to such a conclusion, Jake set about combing high-rise buildings for mana consumables. Those items were hard to find, he'd learned that when he was a regular survivor. They spawned in various places at random, with a low spawn rate. He hoped that being a mutant might make it easier to locate them, perhaps granting him some skill that would aid him in finding them. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. It took him some time, but he eventually stumbled across a mana bead in one of the buildings. As a survivor, he'd needed to scan an item with his PDA to get its stats. Now that he was a mutant, he could do so with just a thought. He picked up the mana bead from the floor and issued a mental command to display its stats. They immediately emerged in his mind. Mana bead, 100 MP, common. Jake remembered that as a survivor, he had needed to mentally trigger the consumption of the mana stored in a mana consumable. He was about to do just that when he accidentally squeezed the bead in his hand harder than he intended. To his great surprise, it easily crushed in his grip, shattering into smaller pieces. Jake was amazed by it. Mana consumables were virtually indestructible. As a survivor, he had tried numerous methods to break a mana consumable before he finally learned the correct way to extract the mana from it. A mana consumable could withstand even a blast from a powerful shotgun. However, as it turned out, as a mutant, he could break a mana consumable without any trouble at all. Once the mana bead in his hand shattered, the bluish magical energy it contained drifted outward. Since Jake hadn't given a mental command to consume the mana, he expected it to dissipate, maybe disappearing into thin air. However, something else occurred instead. His body seemed to draw the magical energy into itself. It flowed through his obsidian black skin, vanishing into his flesh. Immediately after, a notification appeared in his mind. You have just absorbed 100 MP. Jake dropped the transparent pieces of the shattered, now empty bead to the floor. 100 mana points weren't much, but they were better than nothing. Still, he needed much more. He exited the building and continued his search for more mana consumables. Soon, he found a mana marble, containing 250 MP. Then, he was fortunate enough to discover a mana shard with 500 MP. Each of these items was of common rarity. Jake crushed every mana consumable he found to immediately absorb the magical energy they held. Once the amount of mana in his body exceeded 250 points, his movements became fast and agile again, and he was back to full strength. Mana served as both sustenance and currency for him. When he had enough mana inside his body, he could move swiftly and fight at full strength. However, it also functioned as currency for acquiring new skills and abilities. Therefore, he needed to consume mana wisely and sparingly. By the time evening fell, he had collected more than 1,000 MP. After that, he decided to call it a day. Entering a building to spend the night, he quickly discovered that unlike other living creatures, he didn't need to sleep at all. With enough mana inside his body, he could operate at full strength for 24 hours straight. Nonetheless, he chose to relax for a brief moment and reflect on everything he had learned about surviving as a mutant thus far. He definitely needed to understand how much mana his body used each day. So he decided to dedicate the next few days to determining how much mana his body consumed in both active and idle states and calculating the total mana he needed daily. Afterward, Jake chose to explore the building he was staying in. While inspecting one of the rooms, he noticed long scratches across a wall. He wouldn't have given them another look, but a system notification suddenly emerged in his mind. New hunt. Objective: track down and slay an elite ex-human walker. Reward: +1 to body, +1 to claws. Accept, Y/N. That's interesting, Jake thought. It was the very first time he had received a quest as a mutant. He accepted it. Survivors received missions through radio broadcasts. Sure enough, since he was a mutant now, he received quests in a different way. These quests appeared to be triggered by specific events, such as stumbling upon recent traces left by another mutant. Jake closed his eyes and attempted to access his quest menu, or whatever it was called. It worked. In his mind appeared the quest menu. It currently displayed only one quest, the one he had just received. Type: Hunt. Objective: track down and defeat an elite ex-human walker. Reward: +1 to body, +1 to claws. Status: in progress. It was the same info he'd just seen when he spotted the scratches on the wall. Aside from the status of the hunt, no additional details were provided. Thus, the objective was straightforward and simple: to hunt down and eliminate an elite walker. Elite mutants were basically more powerful versions of their regular counterparts. As a survivor, he'd once had to deal with an elite whipper, a pretty formidable foe. As a reward for defeating it, he'd received a rare assault rifle, which he'd been using until losing it during the fight with the beefed-up leaper just before being drawn into the dark void. Now that he was a mutant, rewards for completing quests differed as well. Upon hunting down the elite walker, he would gain 1 increase in body and another in claws. He wasn't certain what aspect of claws would be enhanced, though. With a mental command, he accessed the information on his claw's ability. Having already read its description and by that point being well aware of how claws worked, he saw no need to reread it. Instead, he focused just on one particular line of text. Upgrades, 0 of 3, common. He was aware that each of his skills and abilities was currently of common rarity and had 3 available upgrades. Having delayed studying them earlier, the time had now come for him to delve into the task. With a mental command, he expanded the list of available upgrades. Ability, claws. Upgrade options, common. 1. Strengthen claws to cut through solid materials like metal. Cost, 1 SP. 2. Extend claws by 2 inches, for increased reach. Cost, 1 SP. 3. Significantly reduce transformation time from hands to claws. Cost, 1 SP. To get an upgrade, he needed a skill point. So, perhaps, he would be given a free upgrade for claws after completing the hunt. Nice. Jake opened his eyes, and all the info disappeared. Looking around, he noticed another set of scratches on the wall across the room next to the staircase leading to the upper levels. Climbing one flight of stairs to the half landing, he spotted another series of long scratches extending along the wall further up the staircase. Quickening his pace, he bounded up the steps, taking several at a time. The scratches led farther and farther up. Instead of following them continuously, Jake stopped on each floor to search for loot. In one of the rooms on the 4th floor, he found a mana chunk. After picking it up, he squeezed it in his fist, extracting the magical energy and consuming the precious mana. In a large room on the 7th floor, he came across a group of mutants, mainly walkers. Since the scratches led farther up the staircase, he knew his target wasn't among this group. Nevertheless, he decided to take care of him. He could definitely use some more XP. There was never enough of it. As soon as Jake entered the room, one of the walkers caught sight of him. Without giving it a chance to alert the others, he swiftly darted toward the group, making almost no noise at all. With a powerful slash, he nearly severed the head of the nearest mutant. It plopped onto the mutant's shoulder, attached to its neck by a few remaining strands of flesh. Just as another ex-human spun around, Jake dug his claws into its throat and tore out a huge chunk of flesh, causing a fountain of blood to pour from the nasty wound. He ducked under the arm of another walker as it lashed out at him. With 2 of the claws on his right hand, he pierced the mutant's eyeballs, drilling his talons so deep into its head they penetrated its brain. He yanked his claws out of the mutant's head and swung them at the last mutant's face, leaving long bleeding gashes across it. With the claws on the other hand, Jake slashed the creature across its stomach, causing the steaming intestines to spill out of the mutant's body. Multiple enemies killed. Plus 40 XP. Having taken care of the ex-humans, he searched the room for loot. Despite its size, the room was empty except for some scattered debris. Roaming around, he noticed a familiar item in one of the corners. Using his clawed hand, he retrieved it from the floor and summoned its description with a thought. Magical scroll, push, common, cost, 100 MP. As a survivor, he could learn magic spells from scrolls. He wondered if he could do the same as a mutant. He morphed his claws back into normal hands so it was easier to unroll the scroll. He had to wait a few seconds for the transformation to complete. While it wasn't all that long, he wished it had taken less time than that. In certain situations, timing could be critical. After examining the mysterious symbols written on the ancient piece of paper, he issued a mental command to learn the spell from the scroll, but, alas, nothing happened. He tried a few more times, but no luck. He either couldn't use magic at all, which he could hardly believe considering he wasn't just a typical mutant but rather a magical creature, or he could learn magic in some other way. Perhaps magic spells would become available for purchase in the genetic development interface later on. Jake followed the scratches up the staircase until he reached the door that led to the roof of the 10-story building. The setting sun had already dipped below the high rises, casting a gloomy light in the air. Despite the diminishing light, Jake could still see pretty well. His night vision wasn't perfect, but he could definitely see in the semi-darkness much better than an ordinary human. He also was confident his sight would further improve after he increased the rank of enhanced senses. In the middle of the roof stood a mutant. Jake summoned its description with a thought. Ex-human walker, level 10, elite. Special ability, flurry of swings, the mutant enters a frenzy state, swinging its claws violently for a few seconds. Jake studied the mutant for a moment. It was much larger and more muscular than a typical walker. The ex-human was bare-chested, with ragged pants cropped just below the knees, resembling shorts. Its claws were significantly longer than those of a regular walker, reaching a length of at least 6 inches. The mutant's lower jaw hung open due to its extremely large yellow teeth, preventing its mouth from fully closing. The elite walker gazed at the darkening sky, seemingly captivated by the unfolding twilight. When Jake took a few more steps closer to the ex-human, it detected his movement from the corner of its eye. It spun to face him, emitting a threatening roar to assert its dominance. Jake wasn't impressed. The elite walker surpassed him by a few levels, but it didn't bother him much. With a thought, he morphed his hands back into claws. He paused briefly, waiting for the transformation to fully finish before dashing toward the enemy. Jake reached the walker in less than a second and immediately lashed out with a clawed hand. His talons raked the monster's naked chest, leaving long bleeding gashes in it. His attack didn't seem to do much damage to the mutant, though. If anything, it only made it angrier. The mutant tried to swipe at Jake with its claws, but he ducked in time, and the creature's claws sliced through the air just over his head. The elite walker was definitely faster than regular mutants. Undeterred, the walker attacked him again, prompting Jake to jump back to evade the strike. The mutant was tall with longer arms and claws, giving it a definite advantage in reach. Jake's first impulse was to charge at his enemy, but he held back. It would be smart to learn more about this elite mutant before charging at it headfirst. Being bigger and stronger than average walkers, it could possibly be more intelligent too. He needed to learn its fighting tactics and behavior patterns. The large mutant charged forward, swinging one of its arms at him. Jake dodged the attack and jumped back. The mutant lunged forward once more, extending its arms as if attempting to grab him. He leaped to the side, evading the mutant's claws without fighting back. For a minute, it went on like this. He watched his enemy, studying its movements and trying to anticipate its next actions. The walker kept attacking him, and he evaded each strike. In the end, he concluded that while the elite walker was faster and stronger than regular ones, it didn't seem to be much smarter than them. Also, all its movements were similar to theirs. While the mutant was fast, as long as he kept his guard up, he could evade its attacks without much trouble. Now that he knew the walker's attack patterns, it was time for him to strike back. He leaped toward the enemy, diving under its arm as it lashed out at him, and struck out with his talons. He aimed at the walker's stomach, hoping to split it open and slay the mutant with one precise strike. The tips of his talons dug into the mutant's flesh, but not as deeply as he'd hoped. He left a bleeding mark across the creature's stomach, but the wound was superficial. The elite walker's flesh was denser and tougher than a regular mutant's. This foe would definitely require more than just a couple of wounds to bring down. Jake aggressively slashed at the mutant with his razor-sharp claws, leaving a few more bleeding scratches across its torso. He was about to strike back at his opponent once more when the mutant suddenly let out a hoarse roar. Immediately after that, it lunged forward, swinging its claws at Jake. He ducked, avoiding the blow, but the mutant quickly swung at him with its other arm, prompting him to jump back. The mutant pursued him, closing in once more, brandishing its long claws. Jake realized it must have been the walker's special ability, called Flurry of Swings. The mutant attacked him repeatedly, pushing him on the defensive. With the mutant in a frenzied state, relentlessly striking out, all Jake could do was retreat and dodge. At some point, he realized he was nearing the edge of the roof. The consequences of falling from such a tall building were unknown to him. What damage would it do to his mutant body that fed on magical energy? Would it result in death, injury, or perhaps no harm at all? He didn't know. Even if it was the latter, he had to do his best to avoid falling from the roof. He leaped to the side and swiftly maneuvered around his opponent, returning to the center of the roof. As he did so, the mutant made a grab for him with a clawed hand, but he skillfully avoided its elongated talon-like fingers. About half a minute later, the elite mutant eased off its relentless assault, its movements decelerating, returning back to normal. It was time to bring the prolonged fight to a conclusion. It had already been going on longer than he'd expected. With the mutant no longer swinging its arms like a maniac, Jake seized the opportunity and lunged forward, raking his claws across his foe's body. The elite walker let out a roaring cry, driven more by rage than pain. The fierce fight raged on for a few more minutes. A few times, Jake attempted to slash his claws across the walker's throat, but each time the mutant jerked back, protecting the vulnerable spot. Jake then pounced again, tearing into his enemy with his razor-sharp claws. The elite mutant was bleeding profusely from multiple wounds now, yet it was still alive and kicking. It made a sudden move toward him, slicing through the air with its menacing claws. Jake dodged the attack and lunged one more time, swiping ferociously and leaving another bleeding mark across the mutant's chest. His attacks had seemingly done little to no serious damage to the walker. Jake pounced again, aiming for its throat again. This time, he managed to reach it, and his razor-sharp talons tore through the mutant's flesh, causing dark, almost black, blood to spray from the nasty wound. He'd finally scored a serious hit. The elite mutant froze for a second as if not quite comprehending what had just happened. Then, with surprising speed and force, it lunged forward, catching Jake off guard. Being severely wounded made the mutant even more dangerous. It swiped with its claws, but Jake managed to duck his head just in time. Then the wounded monster rammed into him, causing Jake to collapse onto his back. The mutant fell on top of him, pinning him to the ground. Before Jake could come up with a defensive strategy, the creature leaned in and sank its razor-sharp teeth into his shoulder. It wasn't the first time he had been wounded as a mutant, and once again, he marveled at the absence of pain. However, he could still feel the damage to his body. Then the elite mutant pulled its head back, tearing a huge chunk of obsidian-black flesh from his shoulder. A signal was relayed to his brain, notifying him that he had just sustained serious damage to his shoulder. A system notification emerged in his mind. You have just gotten a negative effect, profuse bleeding. You are losing mana at a rapid rate. It was bad. It was really bad. The mutant was bleeding from the wound he'd dealt to its throat, losing its strength by a second. Still, the mutant was still alive and capable of doing even more damage to him. So Jake brought up his clawed hands and drove his talons into the sides of the mutant's head with fierce force, breaking through the walker's skull and penetrating its brain. The walker froze for a second, then its body went limp and dropped on top of him. 2 more system notifications popped up in his head. Enemy killed. Plus 100 XP. Hunt complete. You have gained a point in body. You have gained an upgrade in claws. Jake pushed the dead mutant off his body and got to his feet. He glanced at the large, ragged hole in his shoulder, where a greenish-blue glow emitted from within, the mana stored inside his body. He watched as the magical energy flowed out of the wound freely and profusely, quickly dissolving into the air. The sight was truly alarming. I fucked up, Jake thought to himself. Despite his severe wound, Jake remained reasonably calm as he searched the 10th floor of the building for any overlooked mana consumables. He moved swiftly, taking broad steps and occasionally checking his wounded shoulder. He could see the ragged hole, gradually but slowly healing. He was acutely aware his body was consuming mana at an accelerated rate while he remained so active, but there was nothing he could do about that. He needed to find some mana consumables ASAP. After finding nothing, he sprinted toward the staircase and bounded down the steps, taking several at a time. Upon reaching the 9th floor, he was about to begin searching but stopped himself, opting to pause and think instead. Searching was futile. He had thoroughly combed through the entire building from the 1st floor up to the roof, so he couldn't have overlooked any mana consumables. He had been meticulous in his search, and his enhanced senses would not have allowed him to miss such valuable items. So the only thing he could do was calm down and let his body heal naturally. He lowered himself to the floor, sitting down and leaning against the wall behind him. Now that he was completely still, his body's mana consumption rate slowed down. Jake had noticed this pattern before. His body consumed mana at a faster rate while he was active, but when at rest, the mana consumption was much slower. He looked at his wounded shoulder. Now that he was no longer frantically running around, his body could give its full attention to the wound, intensifying the healing process. He watched as his flesh was reconstructing itself before his eyes and the ragged hole in his shoulder was closing at an accelerated rate. About a minute later, the wound narrowed enough for the mana to cease seeping out of it. The profuse bleeding negative effect no longer affected him either. A couple of minutes later, the wound finally sealed shut, leaving no scar or any mark on his obsidian-black skin at all, as if he had never been wounded. Once again, Jake couldn't help but marvel at his body's astonishing regenerative ability. As long as he had enough mana, it could heal even severe wounds within minutes. He closed his eyes and summoned his character sheet to see how much mana he had left. After checking the mana count, he realized the healing process had consumed a few hundred MP, more than he had anticipated. Mana deprivation was already causing him to experience a sensation similar to hunger, which had become familiar to him by now. Since he had his stats open, he took a moment to check them out. Name, Jake Turner. Race, Human Morphus. Evolution Stage 1, Primordial Form. Level, 3. HP, 100%. XP, 320 out of 500. SP, 0. MP, 235. Body, 3. Mind, 1. Magic, 0. Claws, Rank I, 34%. Common. Enhanced Senses, Rank I, 46%. Common. Enhanced Agility, Rank I, 73%. Common. Enhanced Intelligence, Rank I, 28%. Common. Body was now at 3, having increased by 1 point after he completed the hunt. Jake realized that this was likely another reason the grave wound in his shoulder had healed so quickly. The body attribute not only made him more resilient to damage, but also improved his body's regenerative abilities. Jake continued to study his stats and noticed that all his skills had improved. It wouldn't be long before he would be able to level up some of them to the next rank. He then shifted his gaze to claws and, with a thought, expanded the list of available upgrades. Ability, Claws. Upgrade options, Common. 1. Strengthen claws to cut through solid materials like metal. Cost, 1 SP. 2. Extend claws by 2 inches, for increased reach. Cost, 1 SP. 3. Significantly reduce transformation time from hands to claws. Cost, 1 SP. Completing the hunt should have granted him a free upgrade for the ability. Yet, no matter what he tried, he couldn't seem to obtain any of the ability's 3 upgrades. What the hell? What was he doing wrong? After another failed attempt to acquire one of the upgrades for claws, Jake closed his stats and summoned the quest menu. Type, Hunt. Objective, track down and defeat an elite ex-human walker. Reward, +1 to body, received, +1 to claws, not received. Status, complete. When he focused on the claws reward, he was finally allowed to pick one of the 3 upgrades for the ability. He gave the matter some thought. Each of the 3 upgrades was extremely useful. Which one should he choose? He could strengthen his claws, but after pondering for a moment, he decided against it. While his claws didn't seem overly effective against the elite walker, elite mutants were quite rare. Most of the time, he had to deal with regular mutants, which his claws could easily rip apart. He wasn't inclined to choose the second option either. His claws were already of adequate reach, so he was satisfied with their current length. Though he could acquire the first 2 upgrades later, he felt no pressing need for them for the time being. It left him with the 3rd upgrade, which appeared to be the most useful to him at the moment. He had already noticed that it took a few seconds for his hands to transform into claws, and vice versa. In critical situations, this upgrade could make the difference between life and death. Besides, he knew he would be able to obtain other weapons in the future. The quicker he could switch between them, the better. So he went for the 3rd option, issuing a mental command to select the desired upgrade. You have received an upgrade for claws. Jake then switched back to the info on the ability. Claws, Rank I, 34%. Upgrades, 1 of 3, Common. He could obtain 2 more upgrades. Jake wondered whether this was the total number of upgrades for the ability or if more would be unlocked later on. He also noticed that claws were currently of common rarity, suggesting that he might be able to upgrade them to the next rarity level at some point. At the moment, he didn't know what requirements needed to be met before he could do that. He figured he would find out at a later time. He opened his eyes, and all the information disappeared. He morphed his hands into claws to test out the upgrade. Now, the transformation took less than a second to complete. It was incredibly fast. One moment, he had his normal hands, and in the next, they became claws. It was amazing. Although there were no enemies nearby, Jake chose not to morph his claws back into hands, because each transformation consumed some of his mana. With less than 200 MP remaining, he wanted to conserve every bit of that precious magical energy. The sensation of hunger intensified within him. His body yearned for mana. Descending the stairs, he realized his movements had slowed and become sluggish as it always happened when his body was running low on mana. He had to fix that fast. After reaching the first floor and exiting the building, he saw night had already descended. His eyes could see quite well in the darkness, though. He saw there were no enemies nearby, which was a good thing. Since the little remaining mana within him was solely used to sustain basic bodily functions, he was in no condition to fight right now. Choosing a direction, he set off on the hunt for mana. For the next few hours, he searched the city for mana consumables. Occasionally, he came across mutants, but managed to evade confrontation. Since his body was compromised by the mana depletion, Jake knew he couldn't fight at full strength. His body appeared to have a safeguard mechanism that restricted his movement to conserve mana. Currently, the remaining magical energy in his body was solely dedicated to sustaining basic functions, causing him to move slower and feel weaker. In his compromised state, even low-level walkers and leapers posed a threat to him. The memories of what had occurred when the elite walker took a huge bite out of his shoulder were still fresh in his mind. While being severely wounded had been an unfortunate event, it had taught him a valuable lesson. He had learned that he could bleed. His new body did not seem to have blood, but it could still bleed. Operating on mana, his body lost significant amounts of this precious magical energy when severely injured. That was another reason Jake wasn't willing to battle mutants at the moment. In his weakened state, he was prone to getting injured, and sustaining a serious wound would be really bad news for him. Losing more mana was something he couldn't afford. After all, he only had about 150 MP left. Jake scavenged for mana for a few hours, exploring one abandoned building after another. He promptly extracted the magical energy from every mana consumable he found. Mana beads held 100 mana points, mana marbles contained 250 MP, and mana shards had 500 MP. These were all common items. He assumed there should be rarer mana consumables out there, but so far, he had only come across common ones. At some point, Jake realized he was finding his way around the city surprisingly well, despite not having his PDA with a map. He always knew where he was, memorizing the layout of the city without any trouble. He navigated through the city just as well as when he had a map app at his disposal, and perhaps even better, as he no longer needed to constantly refer to the map to know where he was. Enhanced intelligence continued to demonstrate its incredible usefulness. It not only sharpened his cognitive abilities, but also significantly improved his memory. Thanks to this skill, he was gifted with a mental map of the city. When he was a regular survivor, he'd established several hideouts and stashes where he rested and stored his supplies, marking them on the map on his PDA. Even without the device, he could recall the precise whereabouts of all his stashes and find his way to any of them with ease. However, he chose not to revisit them. As a survivor, he had immediately consumed the magical energy from mana consumables upon finding them, leaving none in his stashes. He had stocked plenty of canned food, bottled water, ammo, and other survival items, but after he became a mutant, they had lost their value to him. It took him about an hour to find 3 mana beads, collecting enough mana for the safety mechanism of his body to disengage. His movements were as fast as before, allowing him to operate at his best once more. Still, he kept searching for more mana. There never seemed to be enough of it. It took him a few hours to find 2 mana marbles and 1 mana shard, bringing him up to 1450 MP. Figuring it should be enough to last him for a while, he concluded his search. Now, he could go back to fighting mutants. However, he decided to rest for a bit while checking his stats and contemplating the best way to progress further. He found a room in the building he was in and closed his eyes. First, he checked his stats. Not much had changed since his last check, so he quickly switched to the genetic development interface. He examined the list of skills and abilities available for purchase. The cheapest one cost 2000 MP, which was more than he had at the moment. This made him ponder. Most of the mana he collected was consumed by his body. It presented him with a dilemma. Mana served as both fuel for his body and currency, but the spawn rate of mana consumables was extremely low. He wasn't finding nearly enough mana consumables for both sustaining himself and acquiring new skills. There should definitely be better and more efficient ways to acquire mana than just relying on scavenging alone. Jake pondered all of this for about an hour. Then, he realized that his inhuman mind was helping him keep track of time. He didn't need a watch or any other tool to measure time. His mind took care of it, assisting him in calculating the time that elapsed from one specific moment to another. This discovery amazed him. Enhanced intelligence turned out to be an incredibly useful skill. In a way, it replaced the PDA he couldn't live without as a regular survivor. It helped him memorize the layout of the city, keep track of time, and who knew what else his inhuman mind was now capable of. It was truly impressive. Jake checked how much MP his body had consumed over the past hour he'd spent relaxing and thinking, which turned out to be only 5 MP. He then multiplied it by 24, 120 MP. This was the amount his body consumed in an idle state in a day. He doubted he would spend many days entirely idle, but it was still good to know his minimum daily mana consumption needs. After that, he opened his eyes and stood up from the floor. Now it would be a good idea to figure out how much mana his body would consume while being active for an hour. When he got out of the building, daylight had already begun to fill the streets. Jake went on a hunt for ex-humans. Over the next hour, he traversed the city, exploring buildings, and engaging in constant battles. After an hour of intense physical activity, he checked how much mana he'd lost, which amounted to 45 MP. Multiplying the value by 24 yielded a daily total of 1080 MP. Jake was pleasantly surprised by his ability to quickly perform such a complex calculation in his mind. When he checked his stats one more time, he also noticed a substantial improvement in enhanced intelligence. Previously at 28%, the skill had surged to 67%. Engaging in problem-solving tasks and multiplying big numbers in his head had proven to be quite effective in leveling up enhanced intelligence. So, the minimum amount of mana he needed daily was 120 MP. In a highly active state, his body could consume about 1080 MP in a day. This information was quite useful. However, he had a feeling that the numbers would continue to increase as his body demanded more and more mana daily as he grew stronger. Jake continued to explore the city, battling occasional mutants he came across. In one of the abandoned buildings, he stumbled upon replication pods hanging from the ceiling. He decided to destroy them for XP. However, when he neared one of them and was about to slash it with his claws, a piece of info popped up in his mind. New mutation research. Objective: analyze replication pods with 3 different types of mutants within. Reward: bladed tentacles. The ability will be added to the genetic development interface upon completing the mutation research. Accept, Y/N. Jake lowered his clawed hand. The system offered him another quest. It differed from the last one he had completed. The reward was also different. After finishing the hunt that required him to locate and eliminate an elite walker, he had received a point in body and a free upgrade for claws. The reward for this quest, called Mutation Research, was a new ability called Bladed Tentacles. The prospect of obtaining a new ability excited him a great deal. Without hesitation, he selected yes. Jake peered into the replication pod in front of him. Back when he was just a regular survivor, he had examined those human-sized cocoon-like pods at some point. He already knew that a replication pod had the remarkable ability to generate a mutant, nurturing it from a single-celled organism to a fully grown creature within a matter of minutes. Once a mutant reached full development, a replication pod unfurled, allowing the creature to emerge before sealing itself once more to begin crafting another being. However, now that he was a mutant, his heightened senses allowed him to discern more details inside the translucent pod. For a moment, he was mesmerized by the intricate process of mutant creation unfolding before him. The translucent pod was filled with some kind of life-giving liquid, in which a mutant was gradually taking shape, growing larger and filling the interior of the pod. The creature was alive, but its eyes remained closed. Jake watched its fingers elongate into menacing claws, while sharp teeth protruded, filling its oversized mouth. Even though the process wasn't finished yet, Jake could already tell that the mutant was a walker. It mostly looked like a regular human, but its feet and hands were clawed, and there were way more razor-sharp, pointed teeth inside its enlarged mouth than there should be. In his mind, a system notification popped up. Creature analyzed. The status of mutation research has been updated. Jake glanced around the room, taking note of the numerous pods, but finding no mutants in sight. He closed his eyes and called up the quest menu. The active one stood at the top of the list, followed by the recently completed hunt. He focused on his current quest. Type: mutation research. Objective: analyze replication pods with 3 different types of mutants. Reward: bladed tentacles. Status: in progress, 1 of 3. He opened his eyes and scanned the area once more. Some of the nearby pods housed more mutants. They were in the late stages of development, so he could already tell they were walkers. To advance his quest, he needed to locate pods containing different types of mutants. He stepped away from the pod he had already inspected and was about to explore another when a sound caught his attention. It was the disgusting wet sound of a pod on his right opening abruptly, resulting in the transparent liquid within splashing outward. A fully formed mutant, a familiar walker breed, emerged from the pod. Jake's mutant eyes granted him an expanded field of view, allowing him to track the movements of the newly created mutant without needing to turn his head as it lurched toward him. The walker held its clawed hands toward him, about to tear into his face. Jake sidestepped with ease as he swiped at his opponent, his own claws digging deep into the mutant's flesh. The walker growled more in rage than pain, blood pouring from the slash in the side of its neck. The mutant spun to face him, but it was moving too slowly for Jake. He waited for his enemy to finish its turn, exposing its throat before immediately striking again. The claws on his right hand sliced deeply into its flesh, nearly beheading the creature. Enemy killed. Plus 10 XP. The replication pods that had contained the mutants in the final stage of development moments earlier began to open, disgorging fully developed creatures one by one. Among them, Jake spotted a leaper to his left. This mutant type stood out more from a regular human than a walker did. Due to their unique altered anatomy, it was easier for leapers to move on all fours, resembling the fluid motions of a lizard. Leapers were definitely more agile and faster than walkers, which was why Jake had developed a strong dislike for them during his time as a survivor. Transformed into a mutant himself, now possessing heightened senses and enhanced reflexes, Jake no longer felt threatened by them. The mutant scurried toward him, then paused for a second and suddenly leaped. Jake jumped to the side, simultaneously throwing a clawed hand toward the approaching mutant. The tips of his talons dug deeply into the creature's flesh, rending muscle and cartilage with ease. A second later, the headless leaper dropped to the floor behind him, the fountain of blood pouring from the stump of its neck. The severed head flew farther away, striking a wall before bouncing off the floor. It rolled across the room, leaving a trace of blood in its path and eventually settling in one of the corners. Enemy killed. Plus 25 XP. More mutants moved toward him from several directions. He ducked when a walker reached out for him with clawed hands. With a swipe of his talons, he opened up its belly, the steaming insides falling out. Before the dead mutant could even collapse to the floor, Jake was already dealing with another walker, attacking it in a flurry of swings, making a bloody mess of its torso. He attempted to stab another mutant with his claws, but they didn't inflict much damage. His claws were more suited for slashing than piercing. In the genetic development interface, there was a weapon called swords. Eventually, he planned to acquire it to have a range of weapons for various situations. Another mutant lunged at him, ending his line of thought. He turned to face the new threat, dodging its attack and lashing out with his talons. His claws dug deeply into its throat, tearing its flesh and causing blood to spray. Jake had long since learned to always go for the throat when he had the chance to do so. It was the most vulnerable spot of this mutant type. Jake then finished off the previous walker that he'd pierced with claws a moment before. Yet another mutant launched itself at him from the side. This one almost managed to catch him with its talons. Jake slapped its clawed hands aside with one hand and attacked the mutant with the talons on the other, digging all his pointed fingers into its throat and tearing out a huge chunk of flesh. The mutant didn't live long after that. Multiple enemies killed. Plus 50 XP. Another notification emerged in his mind. You have gained enough XP to level up. Your level went up from 3 to 4. You have gained 1 SP. Jake looked around, ready to engage another enemy. There weren't any left. The replication pods that had disgorged the mutants had already started producing new ones. The creatures in the remaining cocoons had not yet reached their final stages of development either. Jake strolled around the room with bouncy strides, inspecting each pod closely. The majority were in the process of developing walkers. To advance his quest, he needed to locate a pod containing a different type of mutant. Finally, he discovered one. Peering inside, he saw what appeared to be a leaper in the early stages of development. It floated inside the liquid the pod was filled with, gradually growing and maturing. Jake watched the process for a few seconds until a system notification appeared in his head. Creature analyzed. The status of mutation research has been updated. A thought occurred to him. Could he check the status of his quest without shutting his eyes and summoning all of his stats? He attempted to access only the status of his quest, and it worked, the system message popped up in his mind. Status, in progress, 2 of 3. So he needed to shut his eyes only when he wanted to review all of his stats. If he wished to check a specific detail, he could do so even with his eyes open. It was good to know. To complete his quest, Jake needed to inspect one more pod. He resumed walking around the room and searching for a cocoon with a different kind of mutant within. After some time, he located one. In one of the corners of the room, he came across a pod with a large mutant being developed inside it, potentially a shambler. As the mutant grew larger, it expanded and pressed against the walls of the pod from within. Despite the strain, the pod's material resiliently stretched without tearing, revealing its remarkable elasticity. Enhanced senses reached 100%. You can now increase it to rank 2. He'd been peering into the pod so hard his skill had advanced surprisingly quickly. Status, complete, 3 of 3. Just as he checked the status of his quest, yet another system notification emerged. Mutation research complete. Bladed tentacles has been added to the genetic development interface. So he'd just leveled up, maxed out the current rank of enhanced senses, and received a new ability. However, before delving into these new developments, he decided to destroy all the replication pods to prevent any new mutants from emerging while he concentrated on his stats. Now that the quest was complete, he no longer needed them, anyway. He set about tearing apart replication pods with his claws, getting some XP for destroying each of them. His hard-skinned obsidian-black body was covered in mutant blood and pod-stinky liquid from head to toe by that point, but it didn't bother him at all. Surprisingly, even the repugnant smell, which he could sense extremely well due to enhanced senses, didn't perturb him much. He continued to destroy the transparent cocoons, tearing apart the organic material they were made of. Underdeveloped mutants wallowed in the pod liquid spread across the floor. He crushed the immature creatures with his hard feet, turning each of them into a pulpy mass, earning extra experience points for that. At last, only one pod remained intact. He turned toward the cocoon nestled in a corner of the room, in which the shambler he'd spotted earlier was nearing completion. The cocoon appeared so swollen in every direction it seemed to be on the verge of rupturing. Jake waited. He could have destroyed the pod a long time ago, but he'd opted not to. He desired to challenge himself against a shambler because he'd never fought one as a Morphus. With no other mutants or pods to produce them left, it was going to be a one-on-one battle. He didn't have to wait long. The pod unfurled, and the fully developed shambler emerged, immediately locking eyes with him. Let's dance, Jake thought. The shambler was huge. It wasn't because it was excessively fat or muscular, though. Like all the other shamblers he'd encountered as a survivor, it had a deformed body that was covered with thick layers of organic growth. Completely enveloped in that disgusting matter, the right arm of the mutant was extremely long, dangling at its side with the tips of its fingers almost touching the floor. The right leg was somewhat larger than the left one as well. The entire right side of the mutant had lumps of organic matter growing all over it, which made the mutant appear much larger. Half of its head was also covered by the protective growth, fully concealing one eye. The remaining eye was disproportionately large, bulging out so much that it appeared to be on the verge of falling out. All the shamblers Jake had encountered as a survivor looked about the same way. Half their bodies were covered in organic growth and one of their arms was as thick as a log and much longer than the other one. He knew the organic matter not only served as a protective layer but also had the remarkable ability to regenerate a shambler's damaged flesh in a matter of seconds. The quickest way to kill a shambler was to destroy its brain. The problem was that most of its head was covered with lumps of protective organic matter. As a survivor, he had to fire at a shambler's organic layer rapidly to give it no time to regenerate. It had always taken him some time to kill a shambler with firearms in the past. All these thoughts and memories flashed through his mind in less than a second. Jake waited for the shambler to make its first move. The massive mutant growled and shuffled toward him, struggling to walk, its movements labored and slow. The creature's substantial weight and mismatched leg lengths hindered its mobility. If Jake had a mouth, he would have smiled. Shamblers had always looked frightening to him as a survivor. Now that he was a Morphus, the cumbersome and sluggish mutant before him looked pitiful. Defeating it would be much easier than he'd initially anticipated. After what felt like a long time, the shambler finally closed the distance, lifting its oversized arm with tedious slowness from Jake's perspective. As the mutant began to swing its arm downward toward his head, Jake easily sidestepped, evading the attack as the massive fist crashed into the empty space he'd just occupied. The mutant's bulging eye locked onto him with an expression of pure disbelief, unable to comprehend how it had missed its target. Before the shambler could even raise its fist from the ground, Jake was already in motion. In the past, he would have aimed his shotgun at the shambler's head to obliterate its skull and the brain within with a powerful blast or two. However, as he'd already noticed, his claws weren't particularly suited for piercing. So he went for the mutant's throat instead. Most of it was protected by a thick layer of organic matter. Jake swiped at it repeatedly in quick succession, rending the growth to shreds, not giving it time to regenerate until his claws finally reached the ex-human's flesh. By the time the shambler finally lifted its fist, the mutant was profusely bleeding from the multiple gashes in its neck. The shambler growled in anger and pain, swinging its thick, log-like arm at Jake. He ducked, and the mutant's fist passed over him harmlessly. Jake quickly moved behind the cumbersome creature and continued to attack its neck. The mutant attempted to turn toward him, but Jake kept circling the creature, staying out of its line of sight. All the growth on its neck was gone by that point, not even able to regenerate anymore. Fountains of blood sprayed from several deep gashes in its thick neck. The shambler was losing a lot of blood, weakening by the second. The monster made another attempt to turn toward Jake, but he easily circled the huge cumbersome creature, staying out of its line of sight. The monster's neck was just a gory mess of shredded flesh by that point. Jake was surprised the shambler managed to stay alive that long. He swiped at the mutant's wounded neck another time, his sharp talons tearing into its flesh, adding new deep gashes to it. The shambler couldn't take any more damage. It emitted one last grunt as its knees buckled. The massive mutant collapsed to the floor with a resounding thud and went completely still. Enemy killed. Plus 50 XP. That was it. Just like that, the fight was over. Jake had anticipated an epic battle, but it turned out to be a one-sided beating that concluded in just a few seconds. So far, he'd defeated all the enemies he'd encountered without breaking a sweat. It was kind of disappointing. He wondered if there were more formidable enemies on the horizon. The elite walker he'd defeated was the strongest foe he'd encountered so far, but the regular mutants he faced didn't pose much of a threat to him. He turned his attention to the last remaining pod, from which the shambler had emerged seconds before. He could see that another monster of the same breed was already in the process of being created. However, it was still in the very early stages of development. Unlike walkers and leapers, it took much longer for shamblers to fully develop. Jake stepped to the replication pod and tore it to pieces with his claws. The transparent fluid splashed onto the floor, and with a wet thud, the undeveloped creature fell amid the shredded remnants of the pod. After crushing the embryo of the creature underfoot, Jake stepped aside from the mess he had created. Now that all the enemies and replication pods were taken care of, he could finally check out his updated stats. His level had increased from 3 to 4 in the recent battle with mutants, granting him 1 skill point to allocate. Enhanced senses had also reached 100%, allowing him to upgrade the skill to rank 2. Completing the recent mutation research quest should have unlocked a new ability called Bladed Tentacles. It was time to delve into all these exciting new developments. He closed his eyes and summoned his character sheet. His stats appeared before him. First of all, he checked the Enhanced Senses skill. Enhanced Senses, rank I, 100%. Upgrades, 0 of 3, common. He focused on the rank of the skill, and a piece of additional information emerged. A raise to the next rank is available. Requirements, Mind 1. Cost, 1 SP. Raise to rank 2, Y/N. So he could raise Enhanced Senses to rank 2 right now, since he had 1 skill point at his disposal and his mind attribute was 1. However, he decided not to do it right now. He first wanted to check something else. He shifted his gaze to another line in his stats, to see how much mana he currently had. MP, 1390. The last time he checked his mana, he'd had 1450 MP, which he'd collected during his mana hunt. Over the course of the last hour or so, he'd consumed 60 MP, exploring the city and fighting mutants emerging from the replication pods in the building. The last time he'd measured the mana consumption during 1 hour of active physical activity, he found that he used up a total of 45 MP. So he just received another confirmation that the more active he was, both physically and mentally, the greater the amount of mana his body burned through. He then reviewed the current status of his abilities and skills. Claws currently was at 78%, enhanced agility and enhanced intelligence at 92% and 71% respectively. It wouldn't be long before these skills reached 100% too. The new ability, Bladed Tentacles, was nowhere to be seen in his character sheet, however. It was understandable. He recalled the note from the quest description stating that Bladed Tentacles would be integrated into the genetic development interface upon quest completion. To ensure everything was in order, he accessed the quest menu. The menu, which stored records of all his quests, both active and completed, appeared in his mind. With no active quests at the moment, the list displayed only the 2 quests he had finished earlier. He focused on the one listed at the top. Type, Mutation Research. Objective, Analyze replication pods with 3 different types of mutants. Reward, Bladed Tentacles, received. Status, completed. With a thought, Jake then closed his character sheet and switched to the genetic development interface, which was basically a skill store. A list of abilities and skills available for purchase materialized in his mind. Genetic development interface. Evolution Stage 1, Primordial Form. Abilities, 1 of 4. Skills, 3 of 7. Ability, Smash Fists. Requirements, Body 2. Cost, 2000 MP. Ability, Swords. Requirements, Body 3. Cost, 2000 MP. Ability, Bladed Tentacles. Requirements, Body 2, Magic 1. Cost, 3000 MP. Skill, Enhanced Strength. Requirements, Body 5. Cost, 3000 MP. Skill, Enhanced Reflexes. Requirements, Body 5, Mind 3. Cost, 3000 MP. Skill, Feral Instincts. Requirements, Mind 5, Magic 3. Cost, 4000 MP. Skill, Enhanced Regeneration. Requirements, Body 7, Magic 5, Mind 3. Cost, 5000 MP. Skill, Enhanced Senses. Requirements, none. Cost, already owned. Skill, Enhanced Agility. Requirements, none. Cost, already owned. Skill, Enhanced Intelligence. Requirements, none. Cost, already owned. Ability, Claws. Requirements, Body 1. Cost, already owned. Jake scanned through the list. Abilities were listed first, followed by skills. Those abilities and skills he already possessed were placed at the bottom of the list. When he became a mutant, he'd been given 3 skills: Enhanced Senses, Enhanced Agility, and Enhanced Intelligence. Later on, he'd acquired the Claws ability. The Bladed Tentacles ability had been added to the store, joining the other abilities in the top half of the list. Jake was kind of disappointed. He'd hoped he would get the ability for free, but as it turned out, he had to buy it for MP just like any other. Still, if he hadn't completed the mutation research quest, this ability wouldn't have become available for purchase at all. He focused on the ability to get additional information about it. Ability, Bladed Tentacles. Description: the mutant can grow tentacles ending in double-edged blades from their back. The tentacles last for a brief period before detaching from the mutant's body. Upgrades, 0 of 3, Common. Requirements, Body 2, Magic 1. Cost, 3000 MP. Jake wanted to acquire the ability, but he couldn't do it at the moment. It was way too expensive for him right now. He wished he knew a more efficient way of acquiring mana consumables instead of simply scavenging for them. So far, he had learned about 2 types of quests with different objectives: hunt and mutation research. The reward for the former was points for his attributes as well as free upgrades to his skills and abilities. The reward for the latter was new skills and abilities. He wondered if there were quest types that offered mana rewards. He hoped such quests existed. He was also aware that before he could acquire Bladed Tentacles, he would need to increase magic to 1. Up to this moment, he hadn't invested a single skill point into that attribute because he hadn't yet found a compelling reason to do so. He wasn't even sure about the advantages or effects of this attribute on him. After giving the matter some thought, Jake decided that raising Enhanced Senses to rank 2 would have to wait a little longer. He planned to do so after leveling up again and obtaining another SP. Choosing to invest in magic instead, he did a final review of his current stats. Name, Jake Turner. Race, Human Morphus. Evolution Stage 1, Primordial Form. Level 4. HP 100%. XP 30 of 625. SP 0. MP 1390. Body 3. Mind 1. Magic 1. Claws, rank I, 78%. Common. Enhanced Senses, rank I, 100%. Common. Enhanced Agility, rank I, 92%. Common. Enhanced Intelligence, rank I, 71%. Common. After that, Jake opened his eyes, and all the information vanished. He surveyed the room, which was littered with the remnants of the replication pods and the bodies of the mutants he had slain. Having nothing left to do in the building, he walked across the slippery floor, now coated in the pod liquid that had spread everywhere. A few seconds later, he exited the building and resumed his journey. When Jake emerged from the building, he was greeted by the morning light bathing the streets. A new day had just begun, signaling the system had refreshed the world, respawning monsters and filling it with loot. Jake wasted no time getting to explore. Adopting the brisk jog that had become his norm, he moved swiftly and silently like the predator he was. Noticing every little detail in his surroundings, Jake prowled through the abandoned city, which had become his hunting grounds. At some point, he noticed that his body was now consuming slightly less mana than before. This change was likely a result of the skill point he had invested in magic. It was an encouraging development. He decided to make good use of it by participating in more battles with mutants than he usually engaged in during a day. Up to that point, he had only obtained one upgrade for claws, which reduced the transformation time from hands to claws to just about a second. His other skills had not received any upgrades yet, and to address this, he needed to gain more skill points. With the aim of leveling up quickly, Jake hunted down one group of mutants after another. Occasionally, he stumbled upon a mana consumable, immediately extracting the mana and absorbing the magical energy. Through active exploration of the city and fighting mutants, it wasn't long before he progressed to the next level. You have gained enough XP to level up. Your level went up from 4 to 5. You have gained 1 SP. It wasn't even noon yet, and he had already leveled up to 5. If luck was on his side, he might gain another level before the day began to wane. However, there was no rush, since he didn't need to sleep and his night vision was pretty good. He could continue hunting mutants even after dark. Immediately after leveling up, he checked his current experience points. XP, 10 of 750. He now had to gain 740 XP to level up to 6. Most of the mutants he encountered were walkers, worth only 10 XP each. He wanted to find new types of mutants to level up more quickly. Running into some shamblers would be nice too. As a survivor, he dreaded encountering huge, strong shamblers. Being now a mutant, he wanted to encounter as many of them as possible. As he'd recently learned, dealing with a shambler didn't pose much of a problem to him. Besides, this kind of mutant went for 50 XP, which wasn't bad at all. Jake was so confident in himself he had no doubt he could take on several shamblers at the same time and deal with all of them in no time flat. Unfortunately, he rarely came across shamblers. Jake entered another high-rise building and surveyed the area. The vast room he stepped into was similar to many others he had explored. It had once been a lobby, but now it was an empty space with piles of debris scattered here and there. Ragged holes dotted the ceiling, and the staircase to the upper floors lay in ruins, making it impossible to ascend further. Several ex-human mutants milled about the room, dragging their feet noisily across the dust-covered floor. As usual, most of them were walkers, but he also spotted several leapers as well. Jake reached one of them before they even became aware of his presence. With a swipe of his claws, he severed the walker's head and instantly turned to slash another ex-human across its throat. A leaper jumped toward him, but Jake swiftly sidestepped, lashing out with his talons, severely wounding the creature in midair. The rest of the mutants lurched toward him from several directions, but Jake was ready for them. At some point during the fight, a system notification appeared in his vision. Enhanced agility reached 100%. You can now increase it to rank 2. Not long after that, another one popped up, informing him that enhanced intelligence had reached 100% as well. In battles against mutants, his brain worked in overdrive, analyzing his enemies' movements and figuring out the most efficient ways of taking them down. All three of his skills had reached 100%, allowing him to advance each one to the next rank. It was definitely a very productive day, and it wasn't even finished yet. The fight ended quickly. Multiple enemies killed. Plus 115 XP. With agile and bouncy steps, Jake moved across the debris-strewn room toward the exit. Just on the edge of his expanded field of vision, a flicker of movement caught his attention. His senses instantly sharpened as he turned his head to scan the room for more threats he might somehow have missed. His gaze locked onto a menacing figure lurking in a shadowed corner of the room. Its completely black body was twisted and ominous, looking absolutely terrifying. The creature had a humanoid figure, but it had the appearance of a dangerous predator, with a slightly hunched posture, bent knees, and nasty-looking claws poised for attack. Though completely motionless at the moment, the creature projected an air of imminent danger, hinting at being able to move with great speed and agility. The creature gave off very dangerous vibes. As a mutant, Jake had already forgotten what fear felt like. He now considered himself the most dangerous creature in this world, but looking now at the black-skinned ominous creature, a long-forgotten prickling of fear crept over him. As he completely turned to face the new threat, preparing to confront it, the black figure mirrored his movement with eerie fluidity. Jake suddenly realized the menacing being before him was, in fact, a reflection of himself. The dark form was not an enemy lying in wait, but his own silhouette mirrored in the reflective front surface of an old piece of furniture. He approached the piece of furniture half buried under a layer of dust. With a hand, he wiped away the thick coating of grime, revealing a dusty mirror that had weathered the passage of time. His reflection stared back at him, distorted by cracks and imperfections in the surface. "Geez, I almost had a heart attack," he thought. If he could laugh, he would. For a moment, he just examined his reflection. He looked really terrifying, but it wasn't only because of the way his obsidian-black textured body looked. Just his movements and bearing radiated the unmistakable aura of a lethal predator. His gaze shifted to his featureless face. Just after his transformation into a mutant, he had run his fingers over his facial features to find the absence of ears, a mouth, or a nose. Since he was already aware he was missing them, it came as no surprise to him when he didn't see them reflected in the mirror. Not for the first time, Jake marveled at his ability to perceive his surroundings, despite an apparent lack of some sensory organs. He did have eyes, though, and they were quite extraordinary. Larger than a human's, they lacked such familiar features as irises or pupils, instead displaying a solid greenish-blue hue, similar to the magical energy found in mana consumables. His eyes were absolutely expressionless, but despite their lack of emotion, their shape or some other quality gave them a menacing appearance. One would easily believe that a creature with such eyes harbored no desires other than to rip to pieces any living being unfortunate enough to cross its path. It was the very first time Jake had the opportunity to see his own reflection. He took his time examining himself, feeling a mix of wonder and dread at the monstrous being he had become. "You're one scary motherfucker," he mentally said to himself. Finally, he tore his gaze away and made his way to the exit. Just as he stepped out of the building, the sudden, sharp cracks of gunfire pierced the air nearby. He instinctively crouched down to present as small a target as possible. However, he immediately realized he wasn't being fired at. The smattering of gunfire echoed from a location somewhere northeast of his current position, though he couldn't tell exactly where or how far away it was. He was able to discern several firearms being discharged, which meant it was a group of survivors shooting at mutants. Or they could be shooting it out among themselves. Just because the world had collapsed and most of the people had been turned into mutants didn't mean hostilities among the remaining humans ended. Jake thought he heard someone shout something, but whoever was shouting was too far away for him to discern the exact words, even with his sharpened hearing. The gunfire lasted for about half a minute more, and then silence descended. Jake waited, still crouching down with his palms resting on the ground in front of him. He suddenly found this sitting position quite comfortable and relaxing. His anatomy had definitely changed more than he'd thought before. As a human, he wouldn't have been able to sit in such a pose for long without experiencing muscle cramps. Now, as a mutant, he found he could remain in that position for an extended period without any discomfort. It had a soothing and relaxing effect on him. Jake waited for a few more minutes, but no additional sounds of gunfire reached his ears. Remaining in the same crouching position as still as a statue, he scanned the streets with his non-human eyes, searching for any threats, be they human or mutant. There was no sign of the people involved in the recent gunfight. That was probably for the best. Jake wasn't eager to encounter any survivors. The only result would be to spook them. He recalled catching a glimpse of his own reflection for the first time a few minutes earlier. It had frightened him a great deal, even though he was already somewhat aware of what his new body looked like. To others, he would undoubtedly appear absolutely terrifying. When others looked at him, they wouldn't even consider that he could be a sentient being. He couldn't speak, and despite being a magical creature, he wasn't a telepath either. Trying to communicate with survivors through gestures would also be a foolish idea. Being mistaken for another mutant, they would likely open fire on him long before he could have a chance to somehow persuade them that he wasn't a mindless monster. Hell, even if he somehow found a way to communicate effectively with humans, it didn't guarantee he would get along with them. Making friends had been difficult even as a survivor, as many of the people he'd encountered resorted to violence, trying to kill him for loot. Now that he was a mutant, he had even fewer chances of making friends with survivors. Besides, he didn't have any reason to do so. His needs and goals no longer aligned with those of the survivors. Finally, Jake got to his feet. Picking a direction away from the recent gunfire, he slipped into a brisk jog, continuing to explore the city. For the next several hours, he battled groups of mutants, earning chunks of XP for slaying them. At some point, he leveled up to 6, gaining another skill point, bringing his total to 2. Unwilling to slow down, he postponed allocating them. By the time the sun began to set, Jake had reached level 7, with 3 skill points now at his disposal. He was currently in a 10-story building overrun by mutants, systematically clearing out one floor after another. He decided to defeat the remaining mutants before assigning his skill points. Eventually, Jake made his way to the very top of the building, emerging onto the roof where he encountered a single mutant, a whipper. As a survivor, he'd once had a mission to deal with an elite mutant, which happened to be a whipper. Elite mutants were basically beefed-up versions of regular ones. Later on, he had encountered regular whippers as well. They were slightly more powerful than shamblers, which was why Jake hadn't been keen on encountering them, even though a regular whipper went for 75 XP. Being amorphous now, Jake had no doubts about his ability to take down the whipper before him without much trouble. He quickly assessed the monster. The massive mutant stood in the center of the roof, facing away from him. It was tall and bulky, resembling a shambler with its protective growth covering most of its body. Standing over 6 feet tall, it had a muscular build. Its right arm extended into a long tentacle below the elbow, hanging at its side and moving through the air in a sinuous manner like a snake. Jake lurched toward the huge mutant. It heard him and spun around, displaying unexpected agility for its size. Its arm tentacle lunged toward him with an intent to wrap around his neck. It was fast, but Jake was faster. Still, running rashly toward the enemy, he wasn't able to dodge the attack completely. He twisted to the side to absorb the blow on his shoulder. The tentacle turned out to be stronger than it looked, the impact staggering him. The tentacle coiled back toward the whipper's body. Before Jake could recover from the blow, the mutant struck out again, sending the tentacle flying back toward him. It unfurled with exceptional speed, zipping through the air. This time, Jake was ready. He dodged to the left, and the tip of the tentacle shot past him. A fraction of a second later, he realized his mistake. The tentacle hadn't intended to strike him directly. The end of the tentacle curled down, approaching him from behind, and wrapped around his ankle. The whipper quickly retracted its arm, pulling back the tentacle and sweeping Jake's leg out from beneath him, causing him to collapse onto his side. Had he still been a human, such a harsh fall would surely have resulted in a broken rib or two. Being amorphous, he didn't even get a scratch. Jake attempted to free his leg from the tentacle's grip, but the coils wrapped around his limb were too tight. The whipper started to pull him closer. This situation would have been terrifying for Jake when he was human, but as a mutant now, he simply allowed the monster to drag him across the roof. With his talons, he could easily have severed the tentacle, but he chose not to. After all, the arm tentacle served as the whipper's primary weapon, and now that the mutant was using it to hold on to him, the whipper was defenseless. Well, maybe not exactly defenseless since it still possessed sharp teeth and claws on its other hand, but while the mutant was preoccupied with using its tentacle to restrain Jake, it was vulnerable and less dangerous. Besides, the whipper was pulling him closer, and Jake's original plan was to close the distance between them anyway, albeit perhaps not in such a direct and submissive manner. The whipper dragged him toward itself, then lifted Jake into the air. He dangled upside down for a second before the monster raised him even higher until his face was at the same level as the Whipper's. And that was when Jake's hand shot out, his talons slicing deeply into the mutant's exposed throat. The Whipper's eyes registered a hint of surprise when he tore a huge chunk of flesh out of its throat. He felt a shudder pass through the coils around his leg, and the pressure slightly lessened. Pulling his upper body up, he reached for the coils with his clawed hands and began working to remove them from his leg. As he tumbled to the ground, he twisted in midair and skillfully landed on his feet. Glancing at his enemy, he saw a ragged hole in its throat, blood gushing freely from the wound. However, the adjacent masses of organic growth had already initiated the process of regenerating the mutant's damaged flesh, mending it with surprising speed. Only Jake wasn't going to let them heal the wound. When the tentacle reached for him, he lashed out with his claws, severing it in half. Blood sprayed everywhere from the stump as what was left of the tentacle flailed in the air, chaotically. The Whipper reached for him with its other hand, but Jake danced behind his enemy, swiping at its neck, tearing to shreds both the organic growth and the flesh beneath. Claws reached 100%. You can now increase it to rank 2. The Whipper tried to turn around, but Jake also moved, constantly staying out of its line of sight and raking the mutant's neck with his claws non-stop. It didn't take long for him to finish off the monster. When its huge body collapsed to the roof with a solid thud, another system notification emerged in his mind. Enemy killed. Plus 75 XP. Jake surveyed his surroundings. He had successfully eliminated all the mutants within the high-rise building. With no more enemies around him, it was time to begin assigning his skill points. He closed his eyes and pulled up his character sheet. As he climbed the 10-story building and defeated mutants on each floor, he leveled up to 8, earning another SP. So he now had 4 skill points at his disposal. First of all, he checked his attributes. Body, 3. Mind, 1. Magic, 1. As he already knew, in order to advance an ability or skill to the next rank, specific attribute requirements needed to be met. He shifted his attention to the list of his abilities and skills. Claws, rank I, 100%. Upgrades, 1 of 3, common. Enhanced senses, rank I, 100%. Upgrades, 0 of 3, common. Enhanced agility, rank I, 100%. Upgrades, 0 of 3, common. Enhanced intelligence, rank I, 100%. Upgrades, 0 of 3, common. He focused on the rank of the claws ability, and a piece of additional information emerged. A raise to the next rank is available. Requirements, body 5. Cost, 1 SP. Raise to rank 2, Y/N. So he couldn't raise his claws ability to rank 2 just yet because his body attribute was 3. He checked the rest of his skills. For a raise to be performed, enhanced senses required mind to be at level 1, enhanced agility needed body to be at level 2, and enhanced intelligence needed mind to be at level 1. With all the attribute requirements satisfied, he could advance all of his skills to rank 2. One by one, he did so with each of the 3 skills. He now had only 1 skill point left. Since he couldn't use it to advance claws to the next rank, he wanted to find another use for it. He could allocate it to body or another of his attributes, but he decided to wait until he leveled up again. Perhaps there was a more beneficial use for it at the moment. He shifted his attention to another line in his stats to see how much mana he currently had. MP, 2150. He pulled up the genetic development interface to refresh his memory on what he needed to acquire the bladed tentacles ability. The requirements were body at 2 and magic at 1. Obtaining the ability didn't require a skill point, instead, he needed to pay 3000 MP to unlock it. Which was more than he currently had. Even if he had the exact amount of mana, he wouldn't have used it to buy the ability, since that precious energy served not only as currency for acquiring new abilities and skills but as sustenance as well. He figured he needed to accumulate at least 4000 MP before purchasing bladed tentacles so that he would have 1000 MP left for his body to feed on. So he could use the remaining skill point to either increase one of his attributes or acquire an upgrade for one of his skills. He got back to his character sheet and returned his attention to the list of his abilities and skills. He'd already acquired 1 upgrade for claws, so this time he decided to get an upgrade for another skill. After giving the matter some thought, he chose to upgrade enhanced agility. He pulled up the list of upgrades currently available for this skill. Ability, Enhanced Agility. Upgrade options, Common. 1. Master acrobatic skills for climbing, jumping, performing aerial maneuvers, and navigating challenging terrain. Cost, 1 SP. 2. Enhance body coordination for faster movement and speed by 20% as well as executing rapid directional changes. Cost, 1 SP. 3. Sharpen reflexes for quicker reactions in combat, enabling agile dodges, swift maneuvers, and precise counterattacks. Cost, 1 SP. Each of these 3 upgrades sounded amazing. He wanted to get all 3 of them since each one would surely prove to be extremely useful. Right now, he could acquire only one of them, however, and after giving the matter some thought, he decided to go with the first one to master his acrobatic skills. With a thought, he acquired the upgrade, spending his last skill point. Jake was eager to put his newly acquired acrobatic skills to good use and couldn't wait to test them out. However, with all the recent updates, he decided to take a moment to review his stats once more before closing them. Name, Jake Turner. Race, Human Morphus. Evolution Stage 1, Primordial Form. Level, 8. HP, 100%. XP, 30/1125. SP, 0. MP, 2150. Body, 3. Mind, 1. Magic, 1. Claws, Rank I, 100%. Upgrades, 1 of 3, Common. Enhanced Senses, Rank 2, 0%. Upgrades, 0 of 3, Common. Enhanced Agility, Rank 2, 0%. Upgrades, 1 of 3, Common. Enhanced Intelligence, Rank 2, 0%. Upgrades, 0 of 3, Common. He noticed that advancing a skill to the next rank didn't provide additional upgrades. Each of his current skills and abilities still had a total of 3 upgrades. It seemed that it was either the maximum number of upgrades allotted to each skill or that more upgrades would become available when a skill was advanced to the next rarity level. Anyway, it was time to move on. Jake opened his eyes, causing all the information to vanish. As the sun continued to set, it cast the world into darkness. He'd just advanced each of his 3 skills to rank 2, and it was already noticeable. For a moment, Jake just stood at the same spot, feeling a surge of energy pulse through his veins as his upgraded senses kicked in, sharpening his vision, smell, and hearing to the next level. Feeling the power coursing through his veins, he flexed his muscles and felt his mutated body effortlessly respond to his commands. Every movement was smoother, quicker, and more precise than he had ever experienced. His mind, too, had been advanced to the next level, making his thoughts race through his brain at lightning speed with startling clarity. Jake was about to descend the building when a daring idea came to his mind. Instead of taking the stairs down, he decided to try something different. He walked to the edge of the roof, staring at the surrounding buildings covered in foliage. The dilapidated buildings stretched as far as the eye could see, with some neighboring roofs standing at the same level as his. Having just acquired an upgrade for enhanced agility, improving his acrobatic abilities, it was now time to put them to the test. Jake gazed at the gap between his building and the neighboring one, estimating the distance. He took a few steps back, then broke into a sprint, his muscles propelling him forward with incredible power and speed. Reaching the edge of the roof, he leaped across the gap between the 2 buildings. He soared through the air, feeling the wind flow over his body. Crossing the gap between the 2 buildings, he landed on the neighboring roof. He launched himself into a roll and then leaped to his feet, moving gracefully as a cat. Once on his feet, he looked back toward the roof he'd leaped from. The gap between the 2 buildings was pretty wide, so it was quite impressive that he had actually managed to make the jump. Jake walked to the opposite edge of the roof, surveying the area. High-rise buildings sprawled in every direction as far as he could see. Some of them were a little lower than his vantage point, while others towered much higher into the sky. Jake didn't recognize the city at all. It looked unlike any city he had ever seen in his life. Wherever he looked, he saw high-rises. The city appeared to lack any unique landmarks or distinctive features that could set it apart from other cities. Peering down, he noticed scattered smaller buildings like diners or boutique shops squeezed in between the tall structures. It might seem like an urban hell to an ordinary person, but to him, the abundance of tall buildings was actually a good thing. Maybe he would learn to shoot spider webs from his hands and swing through the city like Spider-Man. Well, probably not, but since most of the buildings stood at about the same intervals from one another, he could navigate the city by jumping from one roof to the next. Maybe he could also scale the vertical surfaces without much trouble. After all, the recent upgrade he'd acquired for enhanced agility had granted him some good acrobatic abilities. Perhaps in the future, he could acquire additional skills and abilities, like levitation or something similar, to navigate the city even more easily. Anyway, the excitement of his newfound abilities filled him with an incredible sense of freedom. It felt good to be a mutant. It was getting darker by the second, but it didn't bother him. With enhanced senses raised to rank 2, he could see in the darkness even better than before. To his right stood a building that was about 10 stories taller than his. He considered jumping over to it and trying to scale it to the roof. It was pretty risky, though. What if he couldn't cling to the building and ended up falling? Sure, he was eager to test out his acrobatic abilities, but it didn't mean he should be reckless about it. Falling from great heights would definitely hurt him, though he didn't know how much. Most of the buildings were covered in foliage, offering plenty of handholds like vines to grab onto, but Jake decided not to try to scale vertical surfaces for the time being. Instead, he opted to just jump from roof to roof for some time. Maybe he would even be able to reach the edge of the city to see what lay beyond. For a moment, he was perched on the edge of the roof, looking around and pondering which direction to take. The stillness of the night was broken only by the wind as well as the occasional screeching cry of a mutant. His heightened sense of hearing made the distant sounds appear closer than they actually were. Down below, walkers could be seen shuffling through the deserted streets. Jake crouched down, preparing for a leap to the roof of another building. For a second, he was motionless, feeling the cool night air against his mutant skin. Then his muscles coiled like a spring, and he launched himself off the rooftop, propelling his body up and forward. He sailed through the air, then softly landed on the other roof. Without pausing, he broke into a sprint across the roof and jumped toward the next building. As he flew through the air, he twisted and turned mid-air, his newfound acrobatic abilities giving him precise control over his movements. Each jump was powerful and effortless, carrying him from one rooftop to another without a sound. He did his best to move in one direction, but he had to make slight adjustments every now and then because the right buildings weren't always in his path. Below, the mutants roamed aimlessly, unaware of the black figure leaping above them. Now and then, his enhanced senses picked up distant sounds of gunfire along with brief muzzle flashes that momentarily illuminated the darkness of the streets down below. Jake paid them no mind, and the survivors weren't aware of his movements either. Even if someone happened to glance up at the right moment and catch a glimpse of him leaping between buildings overhead, he doubted anyone would be able to make sense of what they were seeing. With each jump Jake performed, he felt a thrill of freedom coursing through him. It was truly amazing. He had never experienced anything like that before. He soared through the night sky for a while, his enhanced abilities making the jumps powerful and effortless. Then, after what seemed like a very long time, he finally reached the edge of the city. He stopped at the edge of the roof, starting at the vast empty expanse extending beyond the city. There was nothing there, absolutely nothing. A desolate landscape met his eyes, with scorched earth stretching endlessly toward the distant horizon. While a road extended out of the city, it lay in ruins and was practically impassable. The arid wasteland was split by long, wide chasms as if the terrain there was constantly ravaged by powerful earthquakes. Traveling in a straight line would be nearly impossible there. Whether on foot or in a vehicle, he would need to constantly move in a zigzagging pattern to maneuver around those huge cracks in the ground. He doubted that vehicles he had come across in the city as a survivor would be able to drive over the rough ground of the wasteland. To navigate that kind of terrain, he would need a special off-road vehicle specifically designed for driving over rough surfaces. Jake was sure that his being a mutant wouldn't prevent him from driving a car. Why would it? However, he was unaware of where he could find an off-road vehicle powerful enough to navigate such tough terrain. Besides, where would he go? Without any destination in mind, he could drive around in the wasteland for a long time without finding anything at all. He decided to figure out the best way to navigate through the wasteland beyond the city's limits at a later time. As of now, there was no reason for him to leave the city. He learned what lay beyond its boundaries, and with his curiosity now satisfied, he could continue to prowl the city that had become his hunting grounds. Jake shifted his gaze away from the desolate wasteland and made his way to the opposite edge of the rooftop. He stared down at the streets below, which were now bathed in the moonlight. Before moving on, He assessed the amount of mana remaining in his body, realizing his recent acrobatic exploits and mana-infused jumps had considerably depleted his energy levels. Determined to fix that, he set off into the night for another nocturnal hunt for mana.